All right.
And we're live. Hello.
Hello, hello. Good to be live. It's good to be alive. Hope everyone's having a wonderful Sunday. We are joined today by a very special guest, the little Platoon. How are you, sir?
I'm not that special, but I'll take it anyway. I'm okay, thank you. Yes, how are you?
Oh, I'm swell. I've been trying to get you to join us for one of these streams for a while, and things finally lined up. So that's good.
Yeah, I'm sorry it took so long. My schedule is
You're a busy boy.
weird.
I understand. Yeah, so today we're going to talk about The Omen and the first Omen, the very belated prequel that was just released this past weekend.
One
It's
could
an
call it a
interesting
prequel. That is true.
one could call it a prequel. I think it wants to be a prequel at least. Have either of you seen any of the other entries in this franchise? I was surprised to learn that there are 6 movies in total.
I was also surprised because I looked it up last night. I think I've probably seen bits of the second. Is it the second Omen? That seems like a logical name for a sequel.
I think
it's called Damien Omen 2, actually.
Oh,
it doesn't...
close enough. I think I've seen bits of that one. I can't remember anything about it. And then, yeah, I was really surprised to look up and find that there were like 4 more after that. It's
funny because I almost spoiled the first Omen for my the first Omen meeting the original, the 1976 Omen for
that won't be confusing at all, I'm sure.
Yeah. I almost spoiled it for my my partner who went to see it with me because I almost brought up the fact that in the third one, I think Damien, played by Sam Neill, is either elected president of the United States or is very close to being elected president of the United States. I'm not really sure. All I remember is seeing the poster as a kid with him standing in front of the seal, the presidential seal, and being like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to touch that one.
I do like Sam Neill, but not that much. Yet none of the other entries in the franchise seem to be very well reviewed. I'm kind of shocked there's so many of them at this point. But I guess it shouldn't surprise
any... The fourth one was a made-for-TV movie, right?
Which one?
The fourth one, I think, was a made-for-TV movie.
Omen 4: The Awakening, you mean?
Yes.
Oh, it is a television film. So
it's not a good sign. Isn't there also isn't the penultimate one of the original one before this prequel? There was, is it like the Omen, the final conflict, and then in the 90s somebody decided it wasn't the final conflict, and so then you had the Omen something else.
Yes,
exactly. Yes. The Omen, the final conflict is Sam Neill's entry into the franchise. I believe that is where Damien is finally sent back to hell, and I think the fourth one is just completely unrelated, and they threw it on TV, figuring that would be the best way to save face with people who were coming to check it out.
It is always nice when the filmmakers or the creators themselves are desperate to finish the thing. Like, please do not make another one. We are calling it the final conflict. Yes. It means it's the end. Stop it. It's gone on too long. We didn't even want to do this one.
And I think similar to the Fast and Furious franchise, which we talked about a couple weeks ago on this channel, the naming conventions of these movies are very odd. So we have The Omen, Damien / Omen 2, Omen 3: The Final Conflict, Omen 4: The Awakening, and then there was a remake in 2006 that has awful reviews, also called The Omen, and now the very first Omen. So it's an interesting franchise. Now, I wouldn't have normally been interested at all in how many years has it been? 50 years later, a prequel to The Omen. But the only reason I saw it is because I watched a trailer and I thought, you know what? That was actually a pretty decent trailer. The marketing for the first Omen was surprisingly interesting. Did either of you, I should say, experience any of the marketing, the trailer, or any of the other marketing stunts they pulled?
I don't think I did. I actually don't think I knew that there was a first Omen until you suggested that I watch it. Thank you for that, by the way.
You're welcome. Yes.
It was quite an experience. No, what did they do? Did they do like meme marketing or something?
The very first trailer I just thought was unique and didn't follow the conventional shitty cliches that we see in a lot of modern trailers. It was like all vibes and didn't give away any of the plot. There's like a song that plays that's kind of spooky, and all the footage is in reverse, and it's vibes only. And I'm like, you know what? That's kind of cool. I'm glad they didn't spoil too much.
It was called the 70s trailer, right? Or is that a different?
No. So they did that as well. I was just about to get to. They also did a trailer in the style of a 70s movie trailer. So like the original Omen, the Omen trailer, it's cropped to 4:3. It's a little washed out looking, and there's a narration that plays over it, very much evoking the style of the original trailer, which I thought was neat. It would have been more neat, I think, if the movie was entirely shot in that style.
Up on that promise, yeah, that I was waiting on that actually.
And then the last little bit of marketing I saw, they did some sort of found footage like home movie that looks like it's from the 90s, honestly. Like old home movie video of a gender reveal, except when they pull the thing and the smoke comes out, it's black smoke. It starts like filling the party and everyone's like coughing and wheezing and the camera's moving around all crazy. I was like, this is interesting marketing. I don't know that it fits the movie at all, but I was intrigued enough by the marketing of this movie that you're like, you know what? Sometimes, and it's very rare, sometimes a belated sequel or reboot is actually pretty decent. We talked about one of those on this channel last year, the year before, which was the Hellraiser reboot that we both actually think is actually better than the original Hellraiser, which is a little bit controversial, but it does happen. It does happen that there are good legacy remakes and reboots every once in a while. So I thought, you know what? I'll give it a shot. And here we are. And I've made both of you watch it. And so I apologize for that.
You should be apologizing for that, actually.
Yeah.
You should be.
Well, let's see. I know we have you for a limited time today, the little Platoon, so we'll want to make sure we get to cover both films. So I suppose let's start with general thoughts on the first movie, The Omen, 1976's The Omen. Little Platoon, what did you think of The Omen?
I've always enjoyed The Omen, but it's one of those weird horror films in that I find it bizarrely relaxing. I think maybe because like the formula is now so well done and so frequently done by so many other things that it's so familiar. You just sort of sit there and say, oh, that's a basically competently made thing. It's a little bit like sort of Final Destination with the devil in places, but nevertheless, it's kind of an enjoyable watch. I like the family dynamic. I think it does the psychological horror aspects pretty well. The score is fantastic. Jerry Goldsmith's always does good work.
All the like spooky tooth chanting and stuff like that.
Yeah, and the Ave Satani is sort of the main theme he does for it. And you can hear some of the similarities in the work that he does for like Alien, for example, as well, in sort of the strings building the tension. Yeah, it's sort of, it fits in like along with The Exorcist in a film that if there's nothing else on, and particularly if it's around October, I'll just say, The Omen, I'll stick that on again. Why not? I don't know exactly how familiar I am with it, but familiar enough to be comfortable just putting it on in the background, I suppose, and following what's going on.
So I think what I'll do next is I'll ask you, the little Platoon, what did you think of the first Omen?
I weirdly
How does
enough, like I guess for the first maybe even 2/3 of it, right up until the point in which the evil plan is revealed, I thought this is a reasonably well shot, quite generic thing. It's not as offensive as I was expecting it to be. It's not as dumb as a lot of these remakes end up being, yet. It's not really doing much for me, but I like the setting. I think putting it in Italy in sort of the early 70s is a good choice. I mean, you get to do the contrast with sort of the collapse of the 68 movement, and so you can parallel the sort of the liberalism that is ushered in with sort of the fears about moral decay and all the rest of that. I think that was all quite nice scene setting stuff. Right up until the point at which they start saying, right, now we have to connect it to the first film. And then things go quite badly wrong.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that for now. Hugh, what did you think first of The Omen?
Well, I actually did a goof here. I ended up watching the first Omen before rewatching The Omen, and it had been a quite a while since I'd seen The Omen. I think probably at least 4 or 5 years, so I didn't remember it as well as I thought I did. And watching it immediately after, coming home from the theater from the first Omen and pretty much immediately turning on The Omen, it's comparatively much better executed. I think it has a lot thematically and symbolically. It's a lot more coherent of a movie. It's it's got some pretty brutal stunts for a 70s movie, which had some pretty iconic standout moments. I think the story is pretty well paced, and it feels like iconic 70s horror. If I think of a 70s horror movie, this is the movie that I'm kind of like, yeah, no, like that, like The Omen. It has the bleakness to it. It has that sort of what's the veneer of the 70s era. It's got that kind of moment of the times that I really enjoy from this type of movie. So I had a really great time rewatching it. I liked it when I was a kid. I always remembered the the famous it's all for you, Damien, and all that kind of stuff.
Then you got to relive it in the first
I
Omen,
did,
because that's what we have to do now.
Yeah, wow. And they brought it back. It's all for somebody in that new one. I not sure who. Not sure who that was supposed to be for.
Well, what did you think of the first Omen?
I found it.
You loved it.
I loved it. I did love it. I did have a very good time with it. It was a lot funnier than I expected it to be at a lot of in a lot of places. I liked at the beginning for a while at the beginning. I was like, oh, we are doing kind of a a throwback to a 70s style, cinematography wise. It sort of does some interesting camera motion at the very start. It doesn't really live up to that promise through the rest of it. It kind of ends up paring down to being very generic, very modern, and I wasn't as impressed with it by that point. And then it starts to get a little confused as to exactly what it's doing. I realized at one point that it's a little bit of a twofer. It's pretty impressive. It's not only a shitty prequel to The Omen, it's also a shitty remake of Rosemary's Baby, which is an interesting move. Getting revealed I think we're right about 2/3 of the way in. So yeah, fascinating that somebody decided to move forward on this. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Well, similar to both of you guys. The Omen is a movie I saw for the first time maybe 2 years ago. The last few years, I've been doing this thing where I try to watch 31 horror movies in the month of October. It's a lot. It messes with your dreams for a while. I don't exactly recommend it. But The Omen is of that class of late 60s, 70s horror movies. It's not my favorite, but I still really enjoy it. I much prefer Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist and some of those films. But I like The Omen. It's fun. It's got a silly, over the top quality to it, but everyone in the movie is treating it very seriously, and it balances those things quite well. So, as we'll talk about, it's about the Antichrist being born. This little kid who is supposedly the Antichrist, and he literally has 666 like as a birthmark on his head, and all these very, very overt, very unapologetically overt, like apocalyptic Christian symbolism. It just makes for a really fun, kind of campy vibe that I really enjoy. Morally, it's very black and white in a way that's also quite fun, in a way that the first Omen, I think, kind of ruins things. It's just people who are trying to bring about the Antichrist and good people who are trying to stop it. It's really not any more nuanced than that. It's fun. I really like the way 70s movies are shot, so it's always fun to watch a movie like this. The music is there's a lot of things about it that will make you laugh, I think, if you go and rewatch The Omen again. It's very silly in a fun way. I'm glad, little Platoon, that you mentioned Final Destination, because on this rewatch, I very much notice how this is kind of a proto Final Destination movie, or should I say that at least some of the Final Destination movies, especially 3, I think that's the roller coaster one where she has a camera and she's taking pictures that says who's going to die next and how they're going to die. The DNA of that is definitely in The Omen. And that's kind of fun. There's a death that shows up very briefly in the trailer where a guy gets decapitated, and it's this very elaborate setup to him being killed, which is very fun. It's an interesting mix of kind of, oh, you're here to see kills, but also there's the sort of supernatural religious element. It's not as mature as something like The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby, I would say, but it's fun, and it's fine for movies to be fun sometimes. On the other hand, you have the first Omen, which, as Hugh mentioned, is a terrible prequel to this movie. It doesn't line up at all, and when it does try and line up, that's when it has the most problems. Like both of you mentioned, I was enjoying it for a bit. I thought, yeah, there's some interesting stuff going on here. I like the setting. Some of the characters seem nice. I almost wish, like, what if nothing bad happened and we just followed some nuns around? That might be nice. And then it really breaks when the full plan is revealed. And as soon as it was said for the first time, I just I just couldn't let it go. I'm like, I hope maybe by the end of the movie, when we finally hear from the villains, that won't be their plan. But that is their plan. And it's one of the stupidest plans I've seen in a horror movie in a long time. So I'm excited to talk about it.
It's actually absurd. I laughed quite hard when that goes like, you cannot act. That's not a plan. What are you doing? Oh dear. I did particularly like the bit where Yoda, Obi-Wan, said that boy is our last hope, and then Yoda said, no, there is another, which apparently is also now true of the Omen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh man, what a reveal.
So I suppose we won't go necessarily chronologically through every beat, but let's talk about the sort of premise of The Omen. So the basic gist of The Omen is that Gregory Peck's character is a ambassador to Italy, right?
Yeah.
From the US, and there's sort of rumors that he maybe might become president one day. His wife kind of mentions that he's a politician and he's working his way up. He's powerful and connected. The movie opens essentially with him going to the hospital in Rome, and his wife has given birth, and the people at the hospital tell him that unfortunately their child died, right? But see, we have this other baby whose mother died at this hospital, and so he doesn't have anyone. He doesn't have any family, doesn't have any parents. Maybe you could adopt him and then not tell your wife, because it would be heartbreaking for her to learn that their child died. So maybe you can just take this child as your own and say, and never tell her. And so he makes that choice. It's a bold choice.
It is a bold choice, and it's one of the things that I really enjoy about this is that, like, you kind of you can understand why he's doing it, but it's the wrong choice, and that I mean, it's classic horror movie setup. He's making a choice for a right reason, but it's the wrong choice, and it's it's going to come back to bite him, and so you kind of get a little bit of a Schadenfreude thing watching it happen, and then you get to watch your character decide that he needs to rectify his mistake. It's solid character work.
Yes, and so as the movie progresses, basically what we're going to find out is that this is the literal embodiment of the Antichrist, and that there are nefarious forces behind the scenes who are working to plant, I guess you could say, the Antichrist as a child into a wealthy family so he could eventually grow up in that wealth and power and one day rule, I guess, the earth as an Antichrist type figure. And so most of the movie is essentially Gregory Peck getting, advice from weird priests who look like they're on their deathbed, telling him, like, no, this child is the devil. You have to kill him. And he's like, I'm not going to kill a child. What are you talking about? And eventually things get worse and worse. And eventually he realizes that he does have to deal with this child. There's a bunch of interesting characters that I quite like in this movie. There's the priest, of course, who is rather haggard and sickly and look like he's about to die, and he's the harbinger, I guess you could say. And I quite like the nurse who comes to replace the nurse who kills herself in front of the child. We'll talk about that. Who's like kind of manipulating the kid behind the scenes. There's a lot of interesting dynamics at play that I think are quite interesting in this movie.
And it relies quite a lot on the mystery of the thing to drum up that tension. You don't ever really, I don't think, get a sense of precisely who is behind it, what exactly the plan entails. It feeds you bits and pieces of information about Damien's backstory and like the way he's born, for example, and so as you say, you encounter the nurse and sort of the hellhounds who protect him, but you don't, from what I record of it anyway, ever really get a strong sense that there is a particular organization or set of people behind it. Not knowing who's behind it makes it more psychologically horrifying, because there are some things that it really doesn't pay to explain, which is a lesson the first Omen did not take, because it decides, we need to know exactly what happened, and of course the explanation was a dumb one. But the ambiguity of the thing makes it particularly interesting, I think, because it is quite a silly film, and it is quite frivolous in some ways, but it does also sort of capture this, what I gather at least was a bit of the zeitgeist of the time, this sense that everything is going quite badly wrong in mid-late 70s America. You've got this reaction against the 60s revolutionary movements. You've got moral majority founded in sort of the late 1970s, which is predicated on this idea that there's a general sense of moral corruption and decay about. And you have the rise of sort of these weird millenarianist type preachers who are going around preaching various new forms of like end time mythology. So it captures the spirit of the time in a way that it makes it very, very popular. There's a reason that what could otherwise have been quite a generic 70s style horror film becomes very, very popular. And I think that sense of mystery, the idea that the people next to you could be conspiring to kill you, is a very important part of it, which again is something that the remake, the prequel even does not manage to recapture.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. It also captures that feeling like the end times are upon us, and something new is being born here that's we don't know how to feel about, to say the least. What was I going to say?
Well, I was going to say that one of the things that I liked mystery-wise, and I love it when horror movies do this, and they decide not to explain certain things, but give you the pieces that you need to sort of add it together. Is we'll find out at one point that the priest, and this is important for the first Omen as well, has the same 666 birthmark that Damien does on the inside of his thigh. And eventually, when it's explained where that comes from, like the only way that you get that answer is he says, "Oh yeah, he'll have it, and so will all the followers of Satan," and that's basically all you get. And we know from the rest of the context that the priest is trying to redeem himself, and that he wants to, move. He wants to, be forgiven. So we get this vague idea that he was part of the group, whatever group this was, that worked to bring this on, and he's having regrets, and he wants to attempt to rectify those. And you can piece that together without the movie telling you outright that that's how it happens. A little bit of the first Omen evidently elected to ignore that entire little bit of characterization and did something completely different, which is wild. But especially if it's trying to function as a prequel to this movie for that character in particular. But, I like that it does it in this one. I like that they give you those kinds of things, that you don't really need the definitive answer. You can kind of figure it out on your own, and it doesn't affect the general, because where it came from isn't really the point after a while, or after the proof is found. It's more about just, what do you do about it? What do you do about it?
Mm-hmm. Are you willing to murder a child? Like, you got to be pretty sure that this child is literally the spawn of the devil in some way before you're willing to kill it. And so the whole movie is kind of building towards him realizing that that's what he has to do. Speaking of the sort of ambiguity in terms of how this came about that I quite like. So there's one scene in particular, they go to a graveyard, and there where they expect to find they expect, what is it, to find the grave of
they go to find the grave of the mother of Damien. They go to find
Right.
Damien's mother's grave, and then they decide, because of what they find, that, oh, well, we got to check this other one just in case.
Yes. So they go to this graveyard and they open it up, and instead of a woman, they find, now everything online says it's a jackal, but when you watch it in the movie, it just looks like a dog. Does it ever say jackal in the movie?
It does. The priest comes to him and he says, well, he gets ready to say it, and then he's interrupted by somebody opening the door, but he screams that he was there at the child's birth and his mother was a jackal.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like that sort of thing. It's fun, and I like that they don't explain it. That this is this has literally been birthed from a jackal somehow. Not something they ever really bother to explain, and I quite like that.
I've seen Woodland Critter Christmas. I think I understand pretty well.
And so once he sees that, there's a grave right next to it, and he opens that up, and he finds where his child has been buried. So it turns out that his child didn't actually die in birth. He was switched on purpose and then killed. I think there's evidence that he was killed sort of by blunt force trauma, that they literally murdered.
Yeah, the skull's smashed, isn't it? Yeah,
yes.
So it's not natural causes. Someone clubbed it over the head.
Yeah. So as silly as the movie does get, I kind of like how really dark some aspects of the basic premise are and how brutal they are. There's some stuff that's quite effective, I think. And that's one of them.
The animism stuff and then the reliance on animals and the imagery of animals is, I think, one of those. So, you have the kid born of the jackal. You have, I think, you can also read like a cuckoo kind of into the replacement of the natural child with this evil thing that's gonna, and actually does throw out the rival child when his wife gets pregnant as well. And all of these things, like animalism has always been kind of part and parcel of devil imagery, I suppose. You have the hellhound dog. I don't even know what breed that is. It's a breed I don't like.
They're
Rottweilers. Yeah. Like one of the meanest, nastiest, bastardish looking dogs there is. And it's like, it's a terrifying sight. And yeah, the devil's reliance on these animal familiars, which seem to be doing the will of someone. It's not just like an animal will. It's definitely a directed thing. Adds to that sort of sense of, I don't know what kind of horror you'd call that, really. It's quite a specific religious type of horror, I suppose.
Yeah, and there's also something of a sort of like chimera-like quality by implication of what Damien is, that he's like literally the son of a beast and a man. You know what I mean? There's a sort of hybrid sort of thing there that I find quite interesting. And the idea, like you said, the sort of cuckoo, is it however you say it, switching at birth and then killing his own child and then giving him this thing. But I think one of the most interesting things about the movie on a rewatch is that Damien isn't quite evil from birth. He's kind of manipulated or sort of coached into being evil by the people around him who are part of this weird, elusive, secretive group. Because if I recall, from most of the first bit of the movie, he's just a kid. And then things start to go wrong after his original nanny kills himself in front of them, which is
a hellhound kind of manipulates or hypnotizes her into doing that.
Is that the implication?
Something like that. Yeah, she has a stare down with one of the dogs, and then during the birthday party, and then in the middle of the birthday party, climbs up to the top of the to the balcony and with a noose and hangs herself off. And striking, really, how much better that version of it looks in the 76 version than the one that we're going to get 50 years later in the new one. It's pretty impactful, watching that when she smashes through the window. It really hits. I was kind of impressed by how good that looks.
Well, it's jarring, isn't it? Because it's the first real wrong feeling thing that happens. Like everything until that point has been normal-ish. That you begin with this fairly upper class, well-mannered party. Everyone's around celebrating the kid's birthday. Nothing seems to be completely amiss, except for, first of all, the hellhound, and then that very sudden, this is all for you, and then off she goes. And that's when you sort of start getting. I think, does the camera immediately pan then directly to Damien as they try and take him away? And it's just, I'm trying to remember exactly how that scene plays out, but it's the first sort of really jarring off feeling thing. And it's like the way I've always read it is that these things are always going to happen because also you get his almost preternatural aversion to being anywhere near a church as well, which I think happens before he's instructed to be anything in particular. But then he's sort of midwifed through into becoming the Antichrist proper later on, so that you already know that something is deeply off about the child, and then the people emerge to try and shape what the offness is going to be.
Yes. One thing that contributes, and this is definitely something I like about the movie, what contributes to how jarring it is when things actually start to turn into a horror movie is that in the beginning there's a title sequence with very spooky, ominous, bombastic horror music. But then for the next, I don't know, 20, maybe even 30 minutes, all the music is very normal. We're just seeing this family living their life. The music is very like pleasant almost. It's not doing the thing where the music is trying to tell you, no, this will be spooky later, don't worry. A lot of modern horror movies, especially, very averse to the idea of treating it like it's a normal movie, or I should say, not a horror movie, like a drama or a character drama, something along those lines, until something spooky happens. A lot of modern horror movies are very insecure about that and don't want you to be bored by the lack of spooky things. So they try to keep an ominous tone even when nothing scary has happened yet. This movie, I think, quite effectively treats it just like a normal character drama until this moment, and that's when things really start to go south.
Yeah,
and the music changes here as well.
I think the big scene that they give you at the beginning to kind of maybe scratch the itch a little bit of like you're sitting in a horror movie is that we're not aware, especially if you haven't seen it already, we're not aware of what he is yet. And then they're walking through the woods after the promotion to Ambassador of London, and there's a river, and all of a sudden Damien's missing, and they turn around and they run back, and his toy horse is beside this river that's running at quite a clip, and they can't find him. And that's really the moment that you get of like parental terror, the worry for a child, and it's
brief.
It's very brief, and it's not the same kind of thing that we're doing later on. But I like that they include it at the beginning to sort of give you this idea of like, well, no, they are a happy family. Like they do love each other, in their way, And so when everything starts to go wrong, we really get to feel that, as the kid starts acting more strange and bizarre.
Yeah, and I really like the way. There's a nice little ambiguity about how strictly evil the kid is. And I think a lot of it, if I understand correctly about the aversion to the churches, so this is great scene, and I really like the way it's shot. I should mention that this movie is directed by Richard Donner, who also did The Goonies and Superman and Lethal Weapon and some other really great movies. I think this movie is quite well directed. There's a scene where they're getting ready to go to church. They're going to someone they know. They're having a wedding, and so they're going to church, and the new nurse that replaced the one who killed herself, nanny, I should say, the nanny says, "Oh, well, he's not feeling well. We probably shouldn't take him to church. He's just a child. He won't, be able to behave himself." And the mom's like, "Excuse me, I told you to have him ready for church." And there's a little power struggle developing between the nanny's influence on Damien and the mother's influence on Damien, and then she goes and gets him ready for church. And I sort of interpreted that maybe somewhere in that space she had told him something about how he should be afraid of churches. You can kind of read it different ways in terms of whether he has an innate aversion to religious iconography or whether it's coached into him. I don't know. I find that ambiguity interesting. As it goes on, there's more and more influence over Damien being wielded by this nanny in particular. The one scene that's a pretty iconic scene is when the wife of the ambassador, who is not his mother but thinks she is tending to some sort of hanging potted plant, and he comes riding by in his little tricycle and knocks the chair stool out from under her and causes her to fall. As the lead up to that happens, he's tricycling in a circle in the room, and the nanny is watching him, and he's going around in circles working up energy, and then she opens the door and lets him out into the hallway, and he goes careening right into her. There's a nice sort of ambiguity there too about exactly what he's doing, what he thinks he's doing, how much influence the nanny has over him. it's ambiguous in a way that I quite like, because it doesn't really matter. But
yeah, it's one of the things that sort of sticks with me most as well is the way that all plays through the mother, and so the ratcheting up of the tension through her, because like as mentioned, we begin with this very doting figure who's very worried as soon as Damien's out of her sight, that she's immediately highly alarmed. But over the course of, I don't actually know how long over the course of the opening act of the film it is, but like you do see her start to get these doubts and these misgivings, and as you're right, it coincides with the arrival of the nanny. But there's the scene when she's sitting and she's sort of nursing this headache, and Damien's just like throwing pool balls around on a table, just making a noise, and she conveys really well that there's this almost this preternatural pressure that seems to be building, and there's a very clear divide that's emerged without anyone ever actually pointing it out. But there's this clear divide that's emerged between her and who she thought was her son. And it sort of comes to the head with that scene with the bicycle. That comes after the point when she knows she's pregnant. That's the sort of the forced abortion.
I think that's
moment, isn't it?
That's the reveal.
Yeah.
She reveals to him that she's pregnant, and he had been. He says prophesized, I think, or foretold. Somebody, is it the priest who tells him that his wife is pregnant and that Damien's going to do everything he can to kill the child and then her? It's the okay.
And then there's the doctor, because the doctor, I think, he's the one who suggests that she gets an abortion. I think because like she's psychologically unwell. I'm trying to remember this.
No, she
that
is right. Yeah, that is right. Yeah. The doctor, the psychiatrist. I forgot about him.
Yeah, the fact that suggests, or it could be a perfectly natural explanation, which is that the doctor is looking at a psychologically distressed woman and saying that the pregnancy is probably causing it. So how about you do this? Or it could be that he's kind of in on the scheme as well. It's another aspect of like you don't know precisely how big this conspiracy is, or like how deep its roots go. And like she doesn't want to do it, but then obviously the priest, having prophesied that Damien will do everything he can to end the pregnancy, seems to do it perfectly naturally and accidentally by riding that tricycle into a ladder. But having been foretold makes you think, nah, there's something definitely deliberate going on there.
But there's a nice build-up. So one of the first things that goes wrong is they try to take him to church, and then when they arrive at the church, Damien is looking at the church, and then he freaks out and starts attacking his mother, in air quotes. Like literally, he's like pulling at her hair and screaming and hitting her in the face. And then Gregory Peck has to come back into the car and like subdue him. And then they drive away to avoid, the embarrassment of the scene they're causing. So that's one of the first big things that happens to the mom that puts her off Damien, unsurprisingly. Another thing I like about it in terms of its subtlety, which there are things about it, the movie, that are not subtle at all. It's kind of an interesting blend of things that are subtle and things that aren't subtle. One of the things I like about it is that clearly the wife is starting to suspect deep down that it's not her kid, but she knows that's crazy, and so she doesn't want to say anything. I think there's a moment with her and Gregory Peck where he's like, "What's wrong?" He's like, "I don't want to tell you. You'll think I'm crazy." And I think that's all we get of that. And then later, when Gregory Peck is talking to her psychiatrist, he says something to the effect of, she's convinced that Damien, she believes that Damien isn't her child. So I think her having another child right now would be disastrous. She's having these delusions that it's not even her kid, right? And I like the way that's played, because she has this deep sort of innate sense that, no, this is not right. This is not my child. Something's deeply wrong here, but she thinks she's crazy for believing it. That's an interesting bit of sort of character development for her. And then as things continue, at one point they go to a zoo and all the animals are freaked out by Damien, which is sort of classic horror movie stuff. Animals,
nature itself turning against.
There's giraffes that run away from him, which is quite funny. As a random side note, one time I went to, I think it was the San Diego Wildlife Preserve. It's a giant zoo that you can ride this tram through. And so there's this big sort of savanna habitat. And something spooked the giraffes, so the giraffes started running. No one really knows what spooked them. But then all the other animals are like, oh, fuck, the giraffes are running? We should be running too. And it started this giant stampede. It was one of the wildest things I've seen. Anyway, just a random.
And it just happened to coincide with your visit, did it?
Yes, exactly.
Has Jen ever checked under your hair?
So then there are baboons that go crazy and start attacking the car. There's sort of a drive-through zoo, which I've never been on one of those. Apparently, those are a thing. There's just loose baboons around your car, and they're all jumping on the car.
Crazy Brits get up to. All right.
We do actually have them. I've been to a couple. There's like Woburn Safari Park where like not all the animals are free, but monkeys are. They well known for just stealing your windscreen wipers and things and just running off.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, we don't have those here. And so anyway, they're freaking out at Damien, things like that. Meanwhile, there is the priest who earlier in the movie tried to get Gregory Peck's attention. Like, that child is the child of Satan. You need to, take care of him. And Gregory Peck, of course, at the beginning of the movie is like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? Like, get out of here. And then this is another subplot which has to do with a photographer who is, I guess, something of like a news and or tabloid photographer who is following around Gregory Peck and his family. Initially in the movie, Gregory Peck bumps into the photographer, knocks his camera to the ground, is like, oh, sorry about that. If there are any damages, you can send the bill to me and I'll pay for it. And that's all we really get of him at first. Later on in the movie, we'll find out that this photographer has been taking pictures of people, and there have been weird visual aberrations, I should say, in the photos that are ominous. Like the woman who ends up killing herself, when he took a picture of her, there was this line on the film that looked like a noose around her neck. And when he takes a picture of the priest, there is a slash going through him. And as silly as it is, I quite like this. It's just fun. I always like it when stories treat like premonitions and dreams like they're real. There's just something fun about it. To me, it is kind of silly that just this one photographer. I'm not sure why. I guess because Gregory Peck bumped into his camera. That's why it has the ability to tell the future. I'm not quite sure how that works, but it's fun. I also quite like this photographer character. He's just, he's trying to help him out. Goes on a journey with him until, unfortunately, he gets abruptly decapitated.
I love how they find out he's going to get decapitated too, where he's explaining how he came to the conclusion that all of this is probably real and that he thinks he should help him. Because he goes into the one room where the priest was staying, and he takes a picture of himself in the mirror, and there's just this giant line across his neck. It's it adds a little bit of a ticking clock element to their adventure together. Like, we got to figure this out. Like, I'm pretty invested in this, as you can see. Yeah. Might be nothing, but I have good reason to believe that helping you is the move.
While we're on this subplot, I want to talk about some of the deaths. So we already talked about the nanny who hangs herself and then crashes into the window. It's very jarring. It's one of the first overtly spooky things that happened. How do you guys feel about the priest's death?
It's the weirdest one in the sense that it's the most overtly supernatural, I think.
Yeah.
Because the weather changes, the storm suddenly comes in, and everything seems to be lined up against him. The gates locked, and then the doors to the church are locked, and then the lightning strikes the lightning rod at the top, and that has to fall down. So it's the one where, in a way, the devil, I guess, is most clearly showing his hand. But it's also in the setting where you'd least expect it. I think that might have been done just to make that contrast quite apparent. It's like, you're technically on this sacred ground, but actually he can get you here as well. And you get that very quick ratcheting up of the terror factor as he runs away, and like bit of a shaky cam as it follows him around. But I don't know how well it really fits with the other two, though, just because the other two are, well, the first one is just the nurse, and that's the most sort of jarring in terms of being set against everything that precedes. The most Final Destination one has to be the photographer's, though, just because that's he throws the ambassador throws the knives away, says, I'm not going to do it. And then the photographer says, well, I'll do it. So he goes and just spends about 5 hours, it feels like, picking up these knives as this truck just rolls down toward him. It's like, you must be able to hear this. It's been rolling at you for about 20 minutes. But no. And then, of course, the sheet glass takes him out. But I like them. I think, the priest one is simultaneously my most Annalise favorite. I think it's most in the sense, I think it just does the best job of conveying this supernatural terror, but least in the sense that I don't think the supernatural element makes as much sense as it does in the other two. But that might just be a weird hang-up.
Yeah, well,
No, I
to
totally
go
agree.
along with the idea of him spending 5 hours picking up the knives, we get a couple of good reaction shots of him putting his hands up and just screaming no, as a very narrow piece of metal flies towards him out of the air. He probably could have just if he had spent a
Just
little bit of that
duck.
time
What are you doing?
ducking, or maybe just like step 3 feet to your left, you'd probably be fine. You might get taken out by a bolt of lightning in the next scene, but you could have had a fighting chance there, I think.
Yeah. I think the priest one is I agree that it's simultaneously the best and the worst, because the storm that precedes it is so overtly supernatural, and like you said, the coincidences that are piled up against him, kind of it's he overplays his hand. But the idea that this giant lightning rod impales him and leaves him standing up like that is really cool. I don't know why it's so interesting to me. You know what it reminds me of? Have you seen Blue Velvet?
No, I don't think so.
It's a good movie. I won't spoil anything about it, but there is a scene where we find a guy who has been shot and he's dead, but he's still standing up. It's not really explained how, but he's still standing up, and the guy like realizes he's dead and like pushes him over. That's what this, I don't know, just something about it reminds me. I like that he gets impaled and then he's kind of stuck standing up because of the way it impaled him. There's something spooky about that. That's fun.
Yeah, definitely. It's the best ending for the death, I think.
Yeah.
It's like it's way less comical than the behead, because obviously the beheading looks incredibly fake as well. But but it's because it is so unnatural. I don't know if there's almost like a crucifixion element there of him being sort of strung up by this metal pole. But like, yeah, the fact that he's left standing is a cool end visual for it.
And that, let's see, I think those are all the main. Oh no, we forgot one. The other one that I quite like is the wife.
Oh yeah.
She meets a very unfortunate end. I feel the most bad for her on a rewatch.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that poor woman, Jesus Christ. I forgot that she died when I was rewatching it. So it was quite the shock. So
I liked
she ends up
both falls with her, actually. I think she ends up in the hospital because she falls. Damien runs her stool over, knocks it out from under her feet, and she kind of she takes a pretty nasty fall off the top flight of the stairs. And I remembered that she died when I was rewatching it, but I did not remember that it wasn't here. So yeah. I saw that and I was like, I don't know. I don't know if she would have. I don't know if a fall from that height would have been enough to kill somebody. And then of course, she's not dead. But she gets to the hospital, and the nanny comes to visit her in the end, and she gets flung out of what looks like the 6th or 7th story, something, a very tall building, and smashes through the roof of an ambulance. It's like, oh, well,
that'll do it.
That'll do her. She's not getting back up from that one.
Speaking of the fall off of over the railing, I quite like the way that's filmed. So she gets toppled over, and the first thing we see is a goldfish bowl that falls to the ground and shatters in slow motion. That's pretty fun. But she's still left hanging on, and Damien's just looking at her, kind of like Scar and Mufasa. Eventually, he's not doing anything to help her. He's just staring at her like a little freak. And then eventually she slips off and falls. It's a little goofy because she doesn't actually fall normally. It cuts to slow motion, and then as she's falling, it's like just below frame, she's being lowered down to the ground. Reminds me a little bit of that scene in Psycho when the guy falls down the stairs.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a little goofy, but overall, I quite like the way that scene is filmed. She does not die, like you said. She ends up in the hospital until later, when, she's left alone there for a while. What is our main character's name? I keep calling him Gregory Peck. I don't know his name.
Actually, I keep calling him the ambassador. I can't remember what he's called.
His last name is Thorn.
And maybe a little bit of Christian symbolism there, perhaps.
Yeah,
who knows?
Maybe.
He goes on his little side quest where he has to go all the way to Italy and then somewhere else to meet a guy to find out. You basically confirm what we more or less suspect at this point, that this is the child of the devil, and that his original child was killed, murdered, and replaced. And then he has to go to a guy, and when we go there, we hear like the call to prayer. I'm not sure exactly where they are, but it's somewhere in the Middle East.
They're in Jerusalem, aren't they?
Is that where they are?
Yeah, they go to
Yeah,
Jerusalem. It's like a buried city that's just been uncovered. And before they get there, too, they have that the priest has that whole poem, with the omens that that signal the return of the Antichrist or the birth of the Antichrist. Yeah, so when
let's talk about that. That part was a little.
the part's a
I don't
little
know if that
shaky.
quite-
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the way that they execute that. It feels a little. Especially once we get into the explanation of it, it starts to feel a little like an Alex Jones podcast.
It did. It did feel a little forced in a way that everything else had been kind of ambiguous in a good way. That now we're trying to make explicit the sort of prophesied omens that would foretell the birth of the Antichrist. One of them is there's a poem that is recited to him, I think by the priest who gets impaled.
I have it if you want.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay. When the Jews return to Zion and a comet rips the sky and the Holy Roman Empire rises, then you and I must die. From the eternal sea he rises, creating armies on either shore, turning man against his brother till man exists no more.
Nice little bit of poetry. And then when we eventually find out what those connections are to real life, it gets a little, I get a little suspect. So obviously the Jews returning to Zion obviously is the creation of the state of Israel. And then there's the comet. I don't remember which comet, but they're just a comet.
That rips the
comet
sky.
Happened.
A comet happened and turned into a star. Just like it did in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago or something like that.
Oh my God, it's all connected.
Yeah.
And then the Holy Roman Empire one.
Yeah, now that one was
more than a little bit shaky. So Gregory Peck rightfully says, okay, but what about the Holy Roman Empire rising again? What's that all about? And the photographer man basically just says, the economy. Or something like that.
He says the economy, we signed the Treaty of Rome. And I thought it was interesting because they dropped the holy in that scene because the Holy Roman Empire and the Roman Empire, very different entities.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because the Treaty of Rome wasn't by the end of it even a part of the Holy Roman Empire. It was just sort of sanctioned by the Pope or something like that. So it's not really tracking. They could have just as easily have left holy out of that poem and just when the Roman Empire rises and had that bit work, but they dropped the word holy from them talking about it in that scene.
He's by far the least direct because you can find. I think it comes from. There's a weird. It's like a particularly American. It's something like this. I want to say dispensationalism. It's this idea that that you divide the world into these very, very definitive eras during which God has specific chosen people and he acts in these really specific ways. But because it's supposed to be like literal interpretations of the Bible, you have to have a certain amount of poetic license. And normally, at least when I've seen any other example of this, if it's a reference to the Roman Empire, then usually you just supplant America or the rise of America with that because it's an empire. It's the predominant world power. It's a more poetic match than the Treaty of Rome thing was just really bizarre because I like it and I voted for Brexit. So any idea that actually the foundation of the European Union is the thing that brings the devil to earth is absolutely on par with me. But it's such a weird little I don't even know how many people today would know what the Treaty of Rome is. Never mind back in the 70s. It's not even a predominantly American thing. It's the European coal and steel community thing. It's it's a weird. Yeah, it's the one that works the least of all of those. I think if you just said, well, it's the rise of American power, that would have made a lot more sense and been way easier to grasp. But for reasons they didn't do that.
You could even tie it to the rise of a sort of international empire sort of thing. You know what I mean? Like a sort of international coalition. You could tie it to
NATO. It's NATO's fault.
The globalists. That's who's doing it.
It's the globalists.
Could you explain briefly what the Treaty of Rome even is? Because I have no idea. Never.
Yeah, so it's back in, I want to say it's the late 50s. The Treaty of Rome sets up what was called at the time the European Community. So it's very loose, principally economic arrangement, which expands upon an earlier thing called the European Coal and Steel Community. So, to stop the Europeans trying to kill each other again, the Americans decided, let's make France and Germany economically dependent on each other specifically, and we'll have a back door to the French so we can tell them what to do. So you have the Coal and Steel Community, which just basically ensures that those two economies are combined. And then the European Community, which emerges from the Treaty of Rome, just expands that to encompass, I can't remember exactly how many extra countries it is, in sort of the 50s through 60s. The UK stayed out at that time, and only later said, hey, we kind of wanted to be a part of this after all. And then the Europeans said, no, you can't. And then eventually said, yes, you can. But yeah, it's a very technical expansion of the terms of very satanic. Absolutely. Yeah, it means that it sets the stage for German domination of Europe in a way that even the Third Reich couldn't quite have wished for.
Does that even? I don't even understand how that would play to an American audience in the 70s. Would they even know what that means? Because some of the other things I can understand sort of tying into sort of weird fears about the future, but the Treaty of Rome, really? Like, I don't
think it might even have been selected to not be understood, because it's quite old by the time it's mentioned in the film in the late 70s, and because the primary audience is American, I think just having Treaty of Rome sounds legit, and it mentions Rome, so that's good enough for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't quite work. You could have gone more broad and it would have been more effective, I think. But then, because at one point the priest told him he has to go to Jerusalem to meet with man, so he goes all the way to Jerusalem. He leaves his wife alone for quite a long time. That's another thing I noticed on this rewatch. He goes on this globe-trotting journey only to find out, yeah, you got to kill your son. But apparently it's with certain daggers, so
that he could only get from, that one dude.
From random white guy in Jerusalem.
Yeah, living in the weird, like, satanic city that was buried underneath Jerusalem for some reason. He shows up to give them the daggers, and that's pretty much it. Really.
He gives them the daggers. At first, of course, he refuses the call to adventure of killing his own child because he's like, no, it's a kid, I'm not going to kill it. And so the photographer says he'll take them, and then, as we mentioned before, he takes literal ages to pick them up, and he gets decapitated by sheet glass. Very sad. And at this point, Gregory Peck's had enough. He's like, you know what? I got to go home. I got to kill this baby. So he goes home, and this is one of the better sequences in the film, I think. I like the idea that he's coming home and he's got to kill this kid, which he's like not even sure necessarily that he's up to doing, but he's got to fight this like hellhound Rottweiler dog. It's kind of like he's going into enemy territory, even though it's his own home. I quite like that. He has to trick the dog into going down the stairs, and so he locks him in there. And then throughout the final conflict with the nanny, where they're grappling with each other, trying to kill each other, we keep cutting to the dog barking. It's a nice little tension builder. First, he has to go to his kid, and he cuts hair away from him while he's sleeping. This doesn't wake him up, of course. And he notices the tattoo, not tattoo, the birthmark, the 666 on his scalp, and he goes, oh man, this really is the son of the devil.
I'm slightly confused about that, because when they first got the baby at the hospital, presumably it didn't have really long, thick hair. Could they not have? Aren't most babies bald? Would they not have seen it?
They probably would have seen it. There's a shot of it in the movie for sure. It's mostly bald. It looks like a baby.
He also says too, he's like, well, I've bathed him. I know it's not there. He goes, well, it'll be under the hair. It's like, you do realize that you wash hair when you bathe, right? Like I've touched his scalp too, guy. Come on.
I mean, yeah. The most salient one being you saw him as a literal baby, and you were handed this baby, and you didn't go, hey, wait a minute, what's up with this satanic birthmark he has? Is that just a coincidence, or maybe it's not a birthmark, it's just something that developed later? Who knows?
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because they call it a birthmark, but then, they also say that all of the disciples of Satan will have them, and the priest has one, which threw me for a loop on the rewatch, because I was like, wait a minute, hold on now, that's interesting.
It would make more sense as a brand, if anything.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing, because this movie, and there are other movies like it, I feel like they don't quite understand or at least they don't quite understand like some of the symbolism, like what the mark of the beast is even supposed to be. It's just like, oh, this is the people of the devil faction will have it, and it's almost more closely related to what you were talking about with the EU, if anything. In Revelations, I don't remember the exact verse, but it's something about how like in the end times, the beast will come and rule over its followers, whatever, and you won't be allowed to trade if you don't have the mark of the beast. It's almost more like a social security number or a tax number than anything, which is interesting. I think that always seems to get lost. We look at Revelations and we take the symbols and we don't really think about what they mean, and we cram them into a horror movie.
Take a lot of poetic license with it.
I could be wrong, but in Revelations, the Antichrist isn't the son of Satan either, is he? So it's like, it sounds like it's the kind of thing that should be the son of Satan. So we just put those two things together, but it's more like the anti-pope and the pope than the son of the devil.
A lot of the things this movie does, gets the gist right. I quite like that, there's a sort of like by implication, one of the monks, or not monks, one of the priests at the hospital is involved in whatever this little cabal is to try to bring about the Antichrist. But it seems to be this sort of shadowy group, and their motivations seem to be rather straightforward. They want to bring about the Antichrist so he'll rule because they think that's a good thing. We don't really get the why of it. It's just like they're evil, and they want to bring about the evil guy because they want power and control, all that sort of fun stuff. I wish the first Omen took a similar approach into evil faction. But they didn't.
It's great because you don't need to have any more explanation. If your godhead is literally Satan, then you've established that there is such a thing as preternatural evil and that it's corrupting. You don't need it to be a particularly political thing. It doesn't have to have material considerations. These people do Satan's bidding because they believe in him, and that's all it's really required. So you don't need to have any further explanation. And it's just, but we'll get there. But it's baffling how they misunderstood that essential point in the first Omen.
We're almost to the end, and it has what I quite like about the 70s movies. Recently we talked about The Sting, which is a really good movie. Have you seen The Sting?
I don't think so.
Oh, you'd really like it. Fantastic movie. It's Robert Redford, Paul Newman, likable con men doing a big job. It's a really good movie. You should check it out.
Okay.
What I quite like about 70s movies in general, and this is something I brought up when we were talking about The Sting, is that so many of them had really bleak endings that you really feel like when you're watching a movie from the 70s, like this could end horribly. Like our main characters could lose everything and just that could be the end of the movie. I don't get that feeling with a lot of modern movies or even some other eras before and after it. Like 50s movies don't end like that typically. 80s movies don't always end like that. But there's something nice about this era when you go back and watch some of these movies that you can reasonably think that the main characters are just going to lose and it's going to be the darkest ending possible. And that's what we get in The Omen. So he's running away. He has the child and the police are after him. And he gets to a church and he has the daggers and he's about to do it. And right before he can stab this evil child, he gets shot. Of course, they play it a bit more dramatically.
They play it up for a little bit of a confusion thing. And it worked pretty well, too, because I had showed my girlfriend this for the first time. And the twin coffin, she was like, wait, they're just burying them with honors? Like, huh? And then she goes, oh, unless it's him and his wife. Ah, shit. Like, almost exact quote. I was like, it's pretty great.
They bait the reveal, but they, of course, eventually reveal that Gregory Peck is the one who's being buried along with his wife, and that Damien is still alive. And he does a really fun thing where at the very end of the movie, he turns around and looks directly into the camera and smiles a little devilish smile. Cut to black, the end. It's fun. I like it when horror movies have the balls to just have, what would you call this? Dark endings?
Yeah, it's dark on a couple of levels because he's standing with the president and the president's wife and holding the president's hand as well. So when he turns to the camera and does his, I think he tries about 5 different smiles and can't quite figure out which one he's trying to do. But nevertheless, he smiles eventually.
Yeah.
But the fact that he's he's holding the president's hand is a good one, because it's sort of it actually makes it darker than just, oh, Damien's still alive. It's also, oh, Damien's still alive, and also he's now pretty much been adopted by the actual president of America, which is bad, but kind of understandable when you see how politics emerges after that point. So it's I like the ending. It's a little bit corny, but it's
oh
good.
yeah, I it's the kind of corny that I quite like. The movie is treating it seriously. It's the kind of thing that is, if you did it now, people will be like, oh, come on. There's certain things that, like, at the time were pretty groundbreaking and shocking for people, and I think I can appreciate things that now. It's funny. I was listening to John Williams talk about the use of music and how it can kind of change over time. He was talking about the music used in the shower scene in Psycho at the time was horrifying to people. Now it's kind of a comedic punchline. And he talked about Jaws the same way. At the time, that the Jaws music was terrifying for people, and now it's a comedic punchline. And I think the music for this movie definitely falls into that category. It's very bombastic with, like, the choral chanting in Latin and all that sort of fun stuff. And this sort of ending falls into that category for me. At the time, this must have been terrifying for people and really effective. And now it's kind of corny and funny in a way, but I like it. It's fun. I wish the first Omen had any of this sort of charm about it. But that's the gist of The Omen. It's a fun movie. It's got a lot of corniness to it, but I think there's a core to the story that's quite effective. And yeah.
When we haven't talked all that much about Gregory Peck and his performance in this movie, but he's doing a great job. And I think somebody in our chat mentioned earlier that he, especially at the time, was known for playing sort of unambiguously morally good characters and pillars of the community. And so to have him do this sort of complicated, this complicated man who wants to do the right thing but isn't doing it in the right way, and then has to make a very serious moral choice about whether or not to kill what he thinks could be a child, it's interesting, and it really gives him a chance to show off a range that he doesn't do in a lot of his other work. So I like it. I like watching that for him too, because he's a very talented guy.
It plays off his goodness quite well as well, because the reason he doesn't end up stabbing Damien, even though he's got him on the altar and he's got the knives in his hands, is that Damien says, "Daddy, no, Daddy, no." And that causes him to hesitate long enough for the police to burst in and shoot him.
Yeah.
Which is, he's still a good guy, but they quite cleverly put the entire universe against his good intentions.
Yeah. I think that's another reason this movie was so successful, other than it sort of, like we mentioned before, tapped into the zeitgeist at the time in terms of general fears and anxieties about the current state of the world and in the future and all that. Putting a person like Gregory Peck in this movie kind of legitimizes it in a way. And this is kind of the era where certain horror movies are sort of becoming more legitimate. Obviously, The Exorcist was nominated for Best Picture. I don't know if it was the first horror movie to be nominated for Best Picture, but it's definitely one of them. And so this kind of era of horror movies treated seriously, I think a big part of that is the casting of people like Gregory Peck. I think he was very hesitant to do the movie, if I remember correctly. That he was like, "Oh, this isn't the type of thing I typically do." But I'm glad they got him for it. He's quite good.
The Exorcist was indeed the first horror movie to be nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah, and it lost to The Sting, which is tough. Tough break.
Tough break to come up against that movie in the finals.
Yeah. But yeah, did anyone any closing thoughts on The Omen before we move to the much anticipated?
Yeah, we've all been waiting for decades to see where
The Omen is just where it should have stopped. That it was a good film, did a good job, well done. Leave it now, because it's anything after that is just going to make it worse. Also, you're going to have 15,000 Omen clones coming out. So you lose your ability to be unique. It's one of the things that makes one iconic things, as you were talking about with John Williams and the score. They become memes because they are so successful and popular. And if the Omen seems dated and cliche now, it's largely because it sort of creates the cliche for itself. You have to forget all of the things you've seen which look so much like it, because it was one of the first ones to do it. They just decided, no, we'll carry on. Let's just do 4 more. We'll go to made to TV. Who knows? We'll just carry on. And then here we are now, like 40, 50 years later, and it's still going.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, as far as I am aware, none of the Omen sequels are well liked. It's not like The Exorcist, where people will say that the third one is actually surprisingly good. For example, no one seems to have.
Actually, it is surprisingly good. I watched it
Yeah,
because of the Red Letter Media take on that, and pretty interesting.
It does happen. I don't know anyone that likes any of the Omen sequels, so it's kind of shocking to me that they're. I guess it shouldn't be shocking because they're just trying to continue everything they can, but it's a little shocking to me that they're like, yeah, let's keep making more Omen movies.
What's interesting because I think literally the only reason that they decided to reboot it back in 2006 was in order to take advantage of being able to release it on June 6th, 2006. So the poster says 6606.
Right.
That's the only reason that I think they tried to do it. Because otherwise,
How did that work out for him?
Not great. I mean, they missed the apocalyptic, world-ending kind of atmosphere by about 2 years for the financial crisis and by about 5 years for 9/11. So they kind of just really whiffed big on that one.
Well, now, neither of us have seen any of the. Well, actually, did you say you've seen part of the final conflict with Sam Neill, or did you just?
I can't remember if I've seen any of it or not. I looked up some of it because I was wondering if this is, it got a prequel, so I was wondering if this is, the kind of horror movie that has like a big cult following, sort of like, how people trace the adventures of Jason from Friday the 13th or of Freddy Krueger from Nightmare on Elm Street. I was like, is this something like that where, Damien's story is kind of like a big thing? But no, it doesn't seem that way at all. Seems like the only reason to do it is because of 666 on the calendar. Money and 666 on the calendar. Because like otherwise I don't think it would have made any money. Right? Like if you didn't have that one little thing to kind of appeal to the fans of the original, then I really don't know if a reboot of this movie would have been something that would have captured anybody's attention at that time or, since. I can't imagine this one's going to be wildly successful either, but I guess we'll get into it.
Yeah, we'll see. So here we have the first Omen, which claims to be a prequel to the Omen. We'll talk about how well it accomplishes that feat. This is a movie that I would absolutely believe, though I don't have any evidence of this, was a completely different story before they decided, oh, let's make this an Omen movie. And then we found ways of trying to twist it into becoming a prequel. That's how it feels anyway. This is a very kind of scattershot and uneven movie. I think what would I say? What merits it does have, they're not consistent enough. There are some stylistic choices that I enjoy, but then they're abandoned like halfway through the movie, or they show up halfway through the movie. There's one scene in particular. It's like an overhead shot at night of a city, and the camera's zooming wildly. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's kind of like wobbling, and it's and then it's playing this. It's playing that score that's kind of going like whoa, whoa. It really made me laugh.
Whoa! It's kind of crazy. I enjoyed it for being strange, but that doesn't show up. Those kind of crazy zooms don't show up anywhere else earlier in the movie or later in the movie. Very strange stylistic film. Like I said, I thought maybe this had a chance of being good based on the trailers. I think this movie's pretty bad, unfortunately. We talked a little bit about our general thoughts of it. But let's I suppose
it is a bit of a confounding mess, yeah.
Yeah, one wonders why this was greenlit. Other than I don't know what franchises do we have that we can keep making movies for. I looked at the credits for the first Omen, and the guy who wrote it, because apparently, so I looked up the development of this movie, and found that originally someone else was attached to direct, and then they changed directors before the project actually went into production. Got a different director, but the one person who was there the whole time was the writer. The story by Ben Jacoby, and I'm like, who the hell is Ben Jacoby? He's written 2 other films. Both have a 3 and a 3.5 on IMDb out of 10. So clearly he has a very good track record, and I understand why they hired him for this role. I don't understand how this happens. I'm Googling this guy now because I'm like, is he a Nepo baby? Like, what is happening here? They greenlit this guy's story? He's written nothing good at all. I don't understand how this happens. I don't understand how this movie comes to be exactly, but here we are. Suppose we should just talk about the movie itself.
I'm sure other people sat down and watched the original Omen and said, I like it, but I wish we got everything spoon-fed to us about this kid's backstory. Like, really, nobody's told the story of the mother. Like, nobody's told the story through her eyes. And that's what we need now.
The mother is the jackal.
The mother
is a dog creature. Right? Like, how do you even...
What if that was...
The only question is, like, what the father is. Like, who fucked the jackal is, I guess, the
answer is Satan.
Question.
It's Satan, obviously. It's Satan. It's
That would have been a much stronger film title as well, by the way. And The Omen, Who Fucked the Jackal would have been...
well, it's eye-catching, right? It looks good on a poster.
I would have been interested in that regardless of any trailer tricks they had to pull. So,
So, where to begin with this movie? I suppose we'll talk about the premise, and then I sort of want to divide the discussion up, if we can, between how it functions as a prequel and how it functions as its own thing. Because in the first half of the movie, I was like, you know what? This doesn't really feel like The Omen much at all, but maybe it'll just be its own good thing and it won't ruin too much about The Omen, and that'll be fine. And maybe people will complain that it's not a good prequel, but at least it'll be its own good thing. It wasn't, but it had me going there for a little bit. So it
probably was at its best when it wasn't trying to be a prequel. It's like I could get along with it and think, okay, if I forget that this is trying to be an Omen prequel and there has to be a tie-in somewhere, it's doing the slow build-up. It's not rushing things through too quickly. Mm-hmm. I'm intrigued by some of the setup, as I've mentioned at the beginning. I really like the setting. You can do interesting things, paralleling. I think it's the movement of '77 is that sort of period in Italian history when there's that huge sort of social upheaval that they sort of leverage, but not at all well in this movie. There are fun things you can do if you forget that it's an Omen film, and they do very different stylistic and technical things with like how much they're prepared to show of effectively the devil, right? Like you have those weird hallucinatory moments where you see it's almost like something from The Grudge when you have those weird sort of CGI tentacle things or evil hands groping people. It's like that's not an Omen thing at all, but it's a horror thing generally. It's just that as soon as you start thinking, okay, forgetting this is a prequel, it might be a generic but half decent horror film, then they suddenly do a "this is all for you" thing, and then she jumps off the balcony, hangs herself whilst on fire because we have to one up the original.
Yes, yes.
And then it's oh yeah, this is an Omen prequel, isn't it? I know it's an Omen prequel because you keep fucking doing the Omen again.
Yes. I absolutely agree. So let's talk the basic premise of this movie. There is a nun who is arriving at this convent in Rome where she's going to take her vows. She's an American. Oh, she's not a nun yet. She's about to become a nun. She's an American woman who arrives here to take her vows and work at this monastery where they, among other things, they teach young girls.
It's an orphanage. It's an orphanage for girls specifically. I don't think there's a boy among.
Correct.
Yeah.
And one thing I did quite like about the early part of the movie until it, takes a turn is she has this sort of connection with this girl there who's kind of a bit of an outcast. She's shunned by some of the other kids, and the nuns kind of keep her away from the others because she's a problem child, so to speak. She bit another girl, and she gets into fights with other girls. She's weird, and so they kind of keep her in a room locked away by herself. Our nun had a similar experience when she was young in an orphanage, and so she feels a sort of connection with this girl and wants to sort of protect her and wants to help, get her socially acclimated with the other girls and prevent her from being this weird kid who just gets,
This kind of first 10 minutes, and basically from this point on, I was saying, okay, so it's you, isn't it? You are the one. Like this is obviously going to be the twist in this movie.
Yes.
It's not subtle about this in any way, but it thinks it is, which is kind of tragic.
Well, because the very first scene of the film is when the Ralph Ineson, who I like, one of the best voices in modern movies, is playing the priest from the first movie.
Okay, question before you continue. Is that the same priest?
It is the same priest, yes.
Okay.
Father Brennan is the name, isn't it? Yeah.
Father Brennan, yes. It is Father Brennan. And this is one of, like, this very first scene kind of gave me a little bit of hope because it does feel very 70s in the way it's shot, because we've got people working on the roof of a church and we're sort of panning over these, like, the composition isn't focused on any one thing. We're panning over small glimpses of the workers hoisting a stained glass window up to the top, and then as he's walking by down below, and then it stops and kind of does a nice slow zoom right in on him watching, and that feels very 70s to me. This like voyeuristic kind of like take on how to do a long master shot, which is really nice. And then he goes into the confessional booth, presumably, I guess, because he's been called there by Charles Dance, who's playing a different priest. Who,
that's another encouraging thing, by the way, at the beginning. Charles Dance is in this film, and also Bill Nye's in this film, and these are both really good actors who I really like. And then, no, how do you waste both of those?
I know
Charles Dance is only in this opening scene.
I love Charles Dance. I love this guy who's playing the same priest. He was very, very, very good in The Witch. So I'd love to see more of him. Bill Nye, obviously, there's a lot of good male actors in this movie that are wasted, unfortunately.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, so he comes in to talk to Charles Dance, who I presumably has called him here to give him some important information, and he basically just spells it out for you. Yeah, there's an Antichrist. They've given birth to a daughter of the devil. She'd be in her teens now, and he gives him a picture. And every time Ralph Ineson, Father Brennan, asks Charles Dance to enlighten him or explain other details, he does that standard horror movie thing where he goes, "No, I can't. Don't make me say it anymore. I don't want to tell anymore. I can't do." Which is weird because he did clearly give the impression that he had called this guy to him to tell him what was going on. So of course,
it's just too evil, Hugh. Don't make me say it out loud.
Don't make me say it out loud. It's the beginning of the movie. I can't reveal the surprise, except he's gonna tell us, "Oh yeah, she'd probably be in her teens now." Or something, and he teleports out of the confessional booth as Father Brennan is looking at the picture, just disappears from the confessional booth to the outside where the work is going on, and Father Brennan runs after him to get him to wait, can't you tell me more, please? And then in a callback to the death from the first one, the stained glass shatters, something happens, something goes awry with the workers, and a big piece of pipe falls down from the top of the church. And at first, it seems like everybody's fine. I think Charles Dance kind of like winces a little bit as something drops. I couldn't even tell, and when I was watching it, I couldn't tell if you actually see anything fall behind him when that happens, or if it just goes by so quickly. I didn't think it did. My girlfriend swears she saw it, so I'll believe her on that one. Like, sure, yeah, it probably went by.
Believe all women, too. We've learned anything.
Exactly. I believe all women. I do. But so he winces a little bit, and nobody seems to be dead. Nobody seems to be injured. Father Brennan asks Charles Dance if he's okay, and he says, "I'm fine," and turns around to walk away, and then we get the reveal that there's this like big chunk taken out of the back of his head, and he gives a very creepy bloodied smile, and that's the last we'll see of him.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, that's the last we'll see of him. It's almost the last we'll see of Father Brennan, and now we immediately cut from being told that...
Credits. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we cut to the credits, and then we cut to being told, from being told that the child of Satan would be a teenager about now, that she was raised by people in the church, to the protagonist, which I think really just kind of clues you. It's like, yeah, that's her, obviously. Yeah. Obviously it's her. There's
a couple thoughts on that first scene. Obviously, it is really funny to think about Charles Dance like teleporting away. He must have ran, which is funny. But when he gets hit by the pole and then he turns around and we see that like gash out of the back of his head, I'm like, I don't think that's exactly what would happen. But it is funny the way he turns around to keep walking and then turns back around and smiles and his teeth are all bloody. And then it cuts to the credits and there's kind of like a pleasant, happy music cue that comes in. There's something kind of fun about that tonal shift. I quite enjoyed. I was like, you know what? The way that happened was a little stupid, but so was the way the guy got decapitated in the first movie. So I'll allow it because it's funny the way he smiles with blood in his teeth and then the happy music plays. Like, okay, there's kind of like an ironic use of music in the tone of this movie. So like maybe we'll keep that up. We don't keep that up, unfortunately. That sort of sense of humor is gone from most of the rest of the movie, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the style in the cinematography is also gone at this point. It makes very brief appearances later, like we said, in that flyover of the city where everything gets wobbly. But other than that, there's not really like it's just shot like a regular modern horror movie for the most part. There's a few interesting.
It looks like a pretty decent modern horror movie in terms of the way it's shot.
Yeah.
But we kind of stopped doing the 70s zooms and fun things like that. Things that would make it stand apart from other movies of its kind these days. I quite like zooms. They're underutilized, I think, in modern movies. I'd love to see more of them. Yeah, but to your point about how unsubtle it is that the main character is going to be the person we're after the whole time. That's another sort of thing that I got right away as well, but I didn't mind. I was like, oh, that's kind of fun. We're doing the connection between them, but it's just like you said, Platoon. There's a sort of attitude the movie takes where you're meant to be shocked by the twist. It's
because they try to make they do as much as they can, and by that's a relative because it's reliant on their capabilities, which are minimal. But they do as much as they can to try and misdirect you. Like when you meet the child who is their favorite candidate, like the actual subject of the misdirect is this teenage girl who's already in the orphanage, and she's kind of introduced as this weird like Samara from The Ring type thing hiding under the bed. And like, doesn't she lick the protagonist's face in their first encounter?
She does.
So of course now we're going to be friends. Okay, fair enough. But like they're so obviously trying to do that. No, trust us, guys. It's really this girl, and you think, no, it's not. I know it's not because it's so overtly not her. But at that point, like you say, like I didn't really mind that they weren't being very competent in their misdirects. It was just that. Okay, the best this thing is going to be is just kind of generic. That's about as much as I can possibly hope for at this point. It's not going to be hateable. I actually don't think it is hateable as a film overall. It's just that that it's not competently made in almost any respect. And then there was the one particularly shitty bit that happens later.
Yeah, that's probably the worst part of it. Otherwise, I would agree. It's not exactly a hateable movie if you're just looking for something to see with some okay spooks and some decent cinematography and music.
And you can pity it because someone there really thought they were being clever. And you can say, okay, yeah, okay.
And you can look at some details and be like, if you took that away from the rest of what's holding it down, that's interesting. There's a number of small details that I like, but mostly they're stylistic choices that consistent across the film, which is unfortunate. Like, for example, there's one shot later which it was unsubtle in a way that I quite enjoyed it. That felt more reminiscent of something like The Omen. There's a part where she's praying and there's a bunch of candles and we pull back to reveal that the candelabras on the walls and also the candles that she's praying in front of form a weird sort of devil mouth that she's in. You know what shot I'm talking about?
Yeah. I remember that.
It's later in the movie. There's like candles on the walls, and there's candles forming a sort of arch in front of her, and there's another one making an inverted sort of arch behind her. And when you zoom out far enough, it looks like a sort of devil's mouth that she's inside of.
Yeah.
Like, that's fun. I like stuff like that.
Yeah, there's neat. A couple of those. I did sort of like what they do with her hair whenever she wakes up in beds too. Where it's like it's all tangled and all sprawled all over the place. It's got a very almost witchy like vibe.
Like black sun. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some neat stuff,
Usually, most of this neat stuff is in the first half, I would say, quite confidently.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah,
if you ignore all of the characters and what they're doing, it's not bad to look at. It's got a lovely setting as well.
Yeah.
It's just, but the problem is that the character stuff just begins like so early on. I think, yeah, it is the Charles Dance scene at the beginning when he says, as has been pointed out, it's like bad things happening, but I'm not telling you when, where, or how. And then Brennan asks him if he's after redemption or something, doesn't he? He says, "No, I just want it all to be over." I think,
Yes.
well, if that's true, then why aren't you just telling him everything? Like, there is no reason for you to be withholding this information at all, except that the audience needs to not know it yet. Except that we're also not subtle enough to hide it from them, so we might as well just tell them. But from that point onwards, the main character doesn't really have much of a character. If anything, like one of the only nice character beats is hers, though, because you do have this. It's the just before she goes to get she takes the vows, and one of her nun friends says, well, this is happening tomorrow, so let's go and live a little before it happens. And so they personalize what I thought was supposed to be the film's entire thematic point, which is that you have this massive sort of social revolutionary change happening outside, and the contrast with a very cloistered conservative religious ethic on the inside, which is a nice little theme. It completely forgets that that's what it was doing from about the halfway point, but I thought that's what it was going for, and they convey that pretty well because she goes and she does this experiment. She has a few drinks. She has a dance in a nightclub with young men, which is obviously like so far out of her realm of normal experiences. That's okay as a character beat. It's just it's probably the only okay character beat in the movie.
The main character like plays the sort of I've literally never danced before in my life.
She does that fantastically. Yeah, I thought it was really endearing when she gets up to go out onto the dance floor and she's just so awkward at it that it's like kind of a creepy way. Yeah. She's moving in it's funny. It's really funny.
Yeah, she's also clearly uncomfortable in the very revealing outfit her friend has picked out for her. Little details like that, I think, nice character moments for her.
Yeah. She goes and they support it as well by showing a lot of the nuns in their normal social interactions not being these strict and austere religious figures, but they sit around, they have cigarettes, they talk, they joke about men. Like it does quite a good job of humanizing at least some of them to support the work that it's going to be doing with the main character.
Yeah, but then only to eventually have them all be in on it. Yes. That really annoyed me.
Yes.
So so have either of you seen the movie that came out only maybe 2 weeks ago called Immaculate with Sydney Sweeney?
I have not.
No, I've not seen it yet.
It's quite remarkable how similar they are on the surface anyway. In that, I don't recommend the movie, so I don't mind spoiling it. Sydney Sweeney is a woman who's coming to Italy, and she's going to become a nun, and she befriends a woman who's a little bit rebellious like her. And then it turns out that the priests and nuns at this place have actually forcibly impregnated her with something that.
So it's the same movie.
It's literally the same movie.
It's the same film.
Well, it's shocking how similar they are, considering they came out within weeks of each other. The difference in Immaculate is that she ends up pregnant, and they're like, "Wait, are you a virgin? Have you had sex with anyone? You took a vow of chastity when you got here." And she's like, "No, I've never had sex before in my life." And they're like, "Oh my God, this is an immaculate conception. It's a virgin birth." But then it turns out that actually the priests and the evil nuns at this place have extracted Jesus Christ's DNA from what supposedly is a nail that he was, hung to the cross with, and that they're trying to recreate Jesus, or I guess the son of Jesus, depending on how you look at it.
Son of Christ.
Yeah. So instead of trying to bring about the Antichrist, they're trying to, I guess, bring back Jesus, Jurassic Park style. I don't know how else to put it. And so Sydney Sweeney is slowly realizing that, oh my God, it's another bad remake of Rosemary's Baby. It's so funny to me that both of these movies came out and they're both just shitty remakes of Rosemary's Baby. But one of the things that I saw Immaculate first because I had heard what few negative reviews I had seen of the first Omen said that, oh, this is just a tamer version of Immaculate. And I'm like, all right, fine, I'll check that one out. And the first Omen is better, which is part of what gave me hope in the first half. One of the things that's better about it is that in the first Omen, the nuns feel like real people. In Immaculate, everyone's just evil. They're just straight up evil. Like they don't feel like real people at all. So when in the first Omen, the nuns aren't like these weird, what would you say, agents of patriarchal control over women, which is Immaculate's very obviously feminist sort of point that it's going for. Even so much so that, spoiler alert, in Immaculate, in the end, she eventually does give birth to this baby and then kills it with a rock, and it's treated kind of
Wow.
like a triumphant moment. Nice little post-birth abortion scene at the
Very
end.
late term, yeah.
So, but in this movie, the nuns are just, they're just people. They're just women. They're smoking and they're talking about men and they're making jokes at each other's expense. There's some sort of austere elements to it, but like when she's first arriving in Rome and she's driving to the monastery and Bill Nighy is there and we pass through a sort of protest march and she asks what's going on and Bill Nighy says something to the effect of like, oh, young people are turning away from the church and the authority of God, but like maybe you can help us reach them. I'm like, oh, that sounds like something that they would have said at the time. Like these feel like real people. I'm like, I like this. This is pretty good. But then by the end of the movie, it's not a small faction of people that are in on it. It's everyone. Everyone's in on it. And so it really undermines the idea that at least some of these people are just normal Catholic folks trying to do their best, like teaching little girls how to read and stuff like that, and taking care of orphans and trying to reach these young kids who are, rebelling against the authority of the past and all that sort of stuff. By the end, every single person is in on it. I mean, we don't see the literal children in on it, but all the nuns, even the one that she befriended, they're all part of this conspiratorial scheme. And that really kind of undoes a lot of the nice character work that happens in the first half of the movie, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's a clear Rosemary's Baby inspiration in trying to, make these people human and familial, and in order to do the subversion. But like, it doesn't do it because it's such a manufactured setting. It doesn't work in the same way. Like these aren't people you've just randomly met as your neighbors who turn out to be evil. It's like these are people that you've put the person with. It's already structured. It's already manufactured. You've tried to tell us that they're all nice, and now you're telling us that they're all really not nice. Except that them being nice really has nothing to do with their plot at all. It's like they don't really have to be friendly to her in order to get what they want from her. So it doesn't, and then it all falls apart with the reasons they're doing all of this, which is, it actually sounds weirdly like the Immaculate version would fit this film better than this film's version does. Because like if you're saying the fear is that secularism is on the rise and people are turning away from the church, so what we want to do in our hubris is try and rebirth Christ to give people a guiding light again, because we can do that.
You're right.
That actually would work. Yeah. Because then you could say it would be believable to say that this is the sin of arrogance, greed, and hubris, and actually the devil has kind of manipulated all of this from begin with. So you think you're trying to bring Christ back, but actually he's got in and
that's actually so much better. That's really funny.
I know, but the one they actually go with is people are turning away from God, secularism's on the rise, young people are having too much sex. So we're going to deliberately birth the Antichrist because that'll show them. And
that'll draw them all back to us.
Back to the church. We will bring on the apocalypse in order to maintain vague political power. It makes no fucking sense. So the Immaculate one sounds way better.
Let's really nail down on that for the people in the chat who have not seen this movie. First, I would say I wouldn't really recommend it as a good movie, but if you're just looking to pass the time, maybe go check it out. So I don't mind spoiling it for you. The plan of the priests and the nuns in this movie, who all believe that they are Catholics ostensibly, their plan is to create the Antichrist in order to scare secular people back into the church. So they're literally going to do pagan satanic rituals to birth the spawn of Satan just in order to create an antagonist that will scare they think that they can control, I guess. This is like Lex Luthor's plan to create Doomsday in Batman v Superman. It's like, I'm going to create this giant monster to kill Superman, and then I'll control him somehow, even though he's this giant monstrosity. Anyway,
I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out when we get there, okay? Like, let's just get the ball rolling, okay?
Yeah, we'll figure out how to control. We're going to bring about the apocalypse just so. To scare.
We're just going to jumpstart it a little bit. We're not going to let it get all the way there. We're just going to prime it. Prime the apocalypse.
So when Father Brennan first tells our main character that this is their plan, I was like, God, I hope not. God, I hope by the final act that when we finally hear one of them say what they're doing, that maybe this is just Father Brennan's like misinterpretation of what they're really aiming for. But no, it's awful. It's a really stupid plan.
It's really dumb, and it's really strange that the filmmaker and the writer here decided that Father Brennan would be like, he's not a whistleblower on the plot. He's not intimately involved in what's going on, right? Like, he clearly is coded to be in the original one. He's an outsider looking in, trying to solve this problem because Charles Dance warned him about it however many years ago. And so we've now created as a prequel, we've now created a very, very big rift between the character who's warning Gregory Peck about everything that's happening and the character who is trying to help solve this problem in the prequel, who is not involved with it in any way other than he's always been trying to stop it, and then he eventually ends up helping the Hellspawn, who it's not really their fault. They're the good Hellspawn. There's nothing wrong with them. So he's going to help them hide and warn them when somebody comes after them basically play the role of the Nick Fury of the Hellspawn. It's a very strange decision to move.
Because that's the other thing, because the whole plan is that they've had several attempts at spawning the Antichrist. It's like those Snoke clones in The Rise of Skywalker. So we've tried it loads of times. We just leave them in test tubes and shit lying around because they look cool. But they've tried, and they've birthed several potential candidates, and most of them are deformed. But that means that there are many, many, many potential Antichrists, and only one of them is the true X Factor Antichrist. But and all of this to drive people, it doesn't make any sense. There are so many other ways you could do this well. If you don't want to go with the whole bringing Jesus back angle, the film toys with this idea that it is doing sort of the secularism and the moral pitfalls of secularism leading people astray. And so if this is a plan by a group of avowed Satanists to give these evil secular people an antichrist figurehead to rally sort of secularism behind this grand demonic plan, that's also another tenable plot for a vaguely Omen-like movie, because that would go back to sort of the original's very deeply felt disquiet with some of the consequences of the revolutionary movements and the social change that's happened at around that period of time. But the problem is this film can't do that because this film doesn't actually think secularism is at all a bad thing. There is no sense of disquiet. Though the bad thing is the Catholics who are trying to create the Antichrist to bring people back to the church. There's no problem with the other side of the thing. So there's no reason. But if you actually had this is not me saying that I agree with this interpretation, but it would be a fun fictional experiment to say the Satanist plan is we've already had massive social moral decay as a result of people moving away from the church, so now they are ripe for a new leader, and this leader can be the Antichrist, and we will turn them into the hordes of devil worshipping Satanist armies. That could be tenable as well, but they don't do that. It's just it's so easy to find any plan that makes more sense than theirs because their plan is insane.
Yeah,
that sounds more like a 70s movie than this. We're just with a group of weird cultists who are trying to birth the Antichrist to take advantage of what they believe is a moment in time, a tumultuous moment in time where conditions are ripe for them to sort of fulfill their sacred duty, their unholy duty. But what we going with this is a wild move that the Catholic Church is oh yeah, there's riots breaking out all around the city in the last few years since we've started these experiments to try to we've summoned the literal devil into the basement of our church so that he can.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. That's is that the devil? What the fuck is that?
I think it's meant to be the jackal that ends up in.
But it's like a werewolf.
Grave. Yeah.
It looks like the werewolf from Harry Potter, kind of. Anyway. Yes, so I think one of the main problems with this movie, and I probably should have seen this coming, is that what was interesting about this wave of movies from the 60s and 70s is that a lot of these movies were made by non-religious filmmakers, but the stories themselves treat religion like it's just true. You know what I mean? Like The Exorcist is a very sort of Catholic movie. The movie isn't trying desperately to say, by the way, Catholicism isn't real. For the sake of the story, Catholicism is real in The Exorcist, and the same is probably by implication true in The Omen and Rosemary's Baby to a lesser extent.
Or at the
But
the very least, God exists and is real in the Omen.
Yeah,
because it takes
I
place
mean,
in 70s England, which wouldn't have been a Catholic place, but at the very
yeah,
least,
that's true. That's a part of it. But I should have known that a modern a modern filmmaker who got this movie greenlit inside of a major studio system wouldn't allow themselves or wouldn't be allowed by their own beliefs to just let that be the case anymore. It's kind of interesting to me that like so many of the most popular, very religious horror movies they're not anti-religious, but a lot of these modern remakes are because they just like can't allow themselves to, at least even for the sake of the story, just treat it like it's true. And so what you get is a movie like this where it's like, no, actually, really, it's just people in the Catholic Church who want power that are the real bad guys. It's not. I should have seen this coming, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the best part of the movie is, her sort of awakening, the endearing awakening stuff of like her going out with her friend, and all having that bit of characterization as she realizes that the nuns are mistreating this one girl who she feels an affinity towards because they share a similar psychological condition. Put that in air quotes. There's some interesting stuff there. Where she's
let's talk a bit about that. Obviously, she has a connection with her because she was an outcast as well. But there's also the fact that they both see things that aren't real. That's sort of how we're presented in the beginning of the movie. Is that when she was younger, our main character was kind of a troubled child at an orphanage because she would see things and she felt so deeply that they were real. And eventually how she sort of adjusted to normal life as, a priest who helped convince her that what she was seeing was just all in her head. That's Bill Nighy's character. It's like, this isn't real. This is, helped her kind of work through it. So now she's more or less a well-adjusted, if a bit sheltered adult. And she has this connection with this girl in the orphanage who is also troubled, who draws these weird, kind of frightening, ominous drawings and is shunned by a lot of the other kids. And I kind of liked her sort of conflict with the nuns who have a very old school, let's say, approach to dealing with a problem child in this way. We're just like, we'll keep her apart from the rest of the group. If she's being bad, we put her in the bad room, which we call the bad room.
The bad room.
And she gets to stay there until she's feeling ready.
Why is there a bad room, sister? Yeah. Which is, it's interesting because this is a nice part of her characterization, minimal as it is, which is all immediately like thrown away as soon as you find out that everybody has been in on it the whole time. So they're just abusing this girl for no real reason, just because she's.
Well, they say something about how like they've been advised to keep her away from the other children. That's part of grooming her to be the next potential mother of the Antichrist is the idea. So like they're not. It undoes a lot of that character stuff. You're right, because when there's a sort of conflict over like what to do with a sort of misfit, troubled child who's maybe schizophrenic or is experiencing these visions or whatever. That conflict is undermined by the fact that like no, they're just literally grooming her to be the next child of some demon spawn thing, and so that's why they're keeping away from the others. I did like the sort of connection between them, but then once you realize what the plan is, it's like, why do they have two of them other than the sort of the Obi-Wan, like, no, there's another thing that you mentioned earlier. Like, what story-wise, we build up her as a red herring, this younger child, and then she's gone from most of the climax of the movie. She's just gone. We don't do anything with her. She really was just a red herring. In the end, we have this weird post-climax scene that almost feels like a very, very ill-advised attempt to set up a sequel.
Not even just a sequel. Like, we've gone full, like, it's insane what the implication of that post, like, mid-credits or whatever that is scene is.
No, it's before the credits, but it functions kind of like a mid-credit scene, honestly.
Yeah, like the sequel bait, the name dropping, like at the it drops an Avengers initiative thing at the end. Like it's
Wait,
bizarre.
really quick. Go ahead and describe that scene.
Oh, okay. Well, so the three Hellspawn have escaped the, after everything has gone awry and Damien has been birthed with a, surprise twin sister who they decide they don't really need. They try to burn the whole place down, but, through literally just the power of women, they manage to sneak out. Like, there's nothing, they don't, like, nothing, they just get out. And they disappear into the mountains somewhere off in a really cozy looking log cabin where they're all living happily ever after together, just a bunch of little demon babies just chilling out in the woods. And Father Brennan shows up, and he gets a shotgun pointed at him because she's a badass, and he
I
basically
got that vibe as well.
I will kill you if you ever come back here. And he's just basically like, they're coming for you. I don't know when they know you exist, and alive, they know you're still alive, and they know they're gonna come for you. You have to be prepared. And she says something like, I can't, like, basically, I don't want this. I got out of that job years ago. You don't need me. I'm retired. I told you.
It's like the end of The Bourne Identity, where it's like, if I even smell you on my trail.
Yeah, it's like, I'm retired. I told you. I chop logs in the woods now. Okay, this is my life. And then he just goes, they've got a name for it. Your son. They call it Damien. And then it kind of does like a little bring, like sting, a musical sting, and it cuts to black and starts playing the credits. It's like, what are we setting up here, guys? Like, what?
That scene especially, I mean, not that they're off living as a happy little found family in their cabin, woman power and all that, but the fact that he name drops the name Damien right before we cut to black, that feels like a studio note to me, because who in their right mind would think that's at all necessary? It's not like we've been subtle about what we're building up to. Of course, that boy that was born there was the guy from the original movie. Like, why?
It's called the first Omen. The whole point of the Omen was they birthed the Antichrist. Yeah, of course, that's the Antichrist.
It's not a reveal that it's a prequel, guys.
Did Brennan even know that the kid was called Damien at this point? I guess but there's the timeline question of where exactly are we in relation to the events of the original film. How would he have found out what its name is? When does he find time? And what are these people doing throughout the events of the first one? Because now we've established that there are people who know all about the stuff that apparently only Brennan knew about in the first film, but they are just chilling out in the woods and not trying to stop actual Satan? That's
they're like Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. They just left everyone to rot.
And that's not the only Star Wars parallel that you can draw here, too, because we get now a problem created by the prequel where the Obi-Wan figure of Father Brennan just sort of lied to Gregory Peck for some reason. Like, he walked in and told him that the mother of his child was a jackal, but he knows that's not true and knows she's alive.
Oh, that's funny.
So he, I don't understand.
What I told you was true from a certain point of view. How does that even?
It's kind of funny because it does feel a little bit like sequel bait. Not that it's necessarily where they'll go with this, especially if this movie underperforms, which I believe it probably will, unless there's just really nothing out for people right now. The idea, like, well, we can't have them stop anything that happened in the first movie. So, like, what could you even do with a follow up to this movie? I have no idea.
What can you do with, like, they don't play a role in, as far as I'm aware. This is the first time, and I had to look this up afterward because I was like, oh, did he have a sister? Is that like a reveal that happens later on in one of the other movies? No, that this is brand new. So I don't know, like, where do you go from this? Like, are we creating a new timeline where Sam Neill is no longer Damien? Is that, like,
given those films are really unpopular, I mean, what you could maybe do is to effectively retcon everything after the first film. So that we've got the prequel is canon, first film is canon, and then they pick up again with a new set of sequels. And then they effectively make everything after the original Omen non-canonical at this point.
They could.
As you continue the
that would
story
be cool.
along those lines, and then maybe Damien at some point, threatens to not be evil, and then the devil can say, well, if you will not turn to the dark side, then perhaps she will, and then he goes after the sister instead.
I would love to see them do a follow-up, like make, instead of, we got the first Omen, we've got the Omen, keep those canonical, and then just make one called Omens, but it's basically just Escape from LA, except, with a Hellspawn vibe. They're rolling around. That would be great. I'd go see that.
Let's rewind a bit. We still got to work our way through what you could call the plot of this movie. Eventually, she has a very similar sort of set of scenes with Father Brennan, where Father Brennan's like, look, I need to talk to you about this girl. I believe they're, grooming her to be the mother of the Antichrist. So let's talk about that. For some reason, their plan can't just go right from... They can't immediately jump to the Antichrist. They've somehow decided that what they have to do is have the beast, which I want to talk about what the hell that thing even is. There's a giant demonic beast thing that's just very real. It's like an actual satanic creature with like demonic human-like hands. Breed a nun woman, and then they give birth to a child with the 666 birthmark, who will eventually grow up, and then that monster the beast again has to breed with its own child to produce the actual Antichrist. They've learned this through trial and error, of course, with like a whole series of failed Snoke clones, essentially. It's so funny is that Immaculate does the exact same thing, where they're trying to give birth to Christ again, but they failed so many times, and there's a whole bunch of like babies in like vats and jars and things like that. It's wild how similar these two movies are. When you have a movie like The Prestige and The Illusionist come out in the same year, it's like, oh, what a coincidence! Two magician movies. This is like so similar. It's really striking. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a lawsuit even. Setting that aside, through trial and error, they've noticed
they worked in the same Starbucks in LA.
Through trial and error, they've discovered that, the beast has to impregnate a woman and then impregnate its own child to produce the Antichrist. And it's like, sure, that's demonic enough, I guess. I don't know why we're undoing the whole born of a jackal thing. I felt like that was plenty demonic enough, but sure, incest is pretty evil, so we'll do that as well. And so they give birth to these potential candidates to be the mother of the Antichrist, and they have two of them that have worked. And the red herring girl is the younger one, and the main character is actually, it turns out, the real one that they're after. And
because she's old enough to give birth, which is it's strange.
She has been
right?
for a while too, which is weird.
It's
strange.
Let
her live in America for a while.
You'd send her to America to just really get involved with the Antichrist vibe. We do give that off sometimes. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. She really just absorbed because she was in Massachusetts, so Boston. If the Antichrist is gonna come from anywhere, it's probably gonna be a Bruins game. But it makes very little sense to me why you would keep trying after you've had a very poor success rate and one finally works, and you're like, well, we might as well just keep going, like, for posterity, I guess, and they keep failing. One more after a successful one that fails, you'd think somebody might be like, maybe we just bank on that one. Yeah. But they kept going until another one worked, just so that we could have our red herring for the movie for some reason.
Quite a number of years apart too, as well. I also don't understand why the first one that worked out of all these failed experiments, they go send to live in America for a while instead of keeping her presumably at the orphanage where she was born in Italy. Don't quite understand that one, but oh well. So let's talk about some of the spooks and scares that happen along the way in this movie. We got the first death of Charles Dance, may he rest in peace, in the beginning, where he
isn't even dead. He doesn't even die.
Well, one assumes he's dead, Hugh. All right.
Because he never shows back up. But you know what? Maybe he will. Maybe in the new
sequel?
one. Yeah, in the sequel that they're sure to get from their massive box office success.
like tasteful, mildly spooky things. At one point, there's a woman who's like screaming or something like that, and the nuns are like restraining her, and they close the door on her. And then we look like around the corner. There's one nun in particular. This is the one who's going to ape the hanging herself death from the original movie. That which I don't like that scene because it did feel like, oh, see, the twist is we had her on fire as well, which is dumb and adds nothing. Like you couldn't maybe what if she just lit herself on fire instead? You know, that would be kind of shocking and unexpected. Why do we have to add fire on top of hanging herself from the building and crashing through the window? I don't understand. But
did you like her introductory scene where she's standing in the stairway and the wind from somewhere is rippling her robe backwards as she just kind of stands there, and the other two, they're like the older nuns kind of like hesitates and says like, Sister Annabella, and she kind of gives the weird creepy look, and we cut to the other nuns, and the older nun is just kind of like looking side to side like, she's the weird one, you know. We like it's really funny. I liked it a lot.
I actually kind of like the performance that this weird nun gives. There's one scene in particular, the one I was talking about, where she looks and she sees her around the corner in the hallway, and she's laughing at first, and our character is like, "What are you laughing at?" And then she turns very quickly from laughing to crying, and like a tear rolls down her face, like all kind of in one shot too. That was actually pretty impressive. I don't quite know how she pulled that off, honestly. It's sort of indicating that at least this character has a very sort of severe manic depressive sort of personality where she swings back and forth wildly between emotions. She's a kind of interesting, weird character, not super impactful in the story other than the fact that she kills herself and, you know, as a callback to the original. But she's strange in a fun way. There's another scene where she is sort of playing the part of the nanny who's, you know, influencing the red herring girl, right? And she's sitting across from her, and our main character she's had the talk from Father Brennan, and so she's worried about the influence from these people on this outcast girl. And so she's going up to her at lunch. At first thinks she's sitting alone, and then the weird nun is sitting with her. And she goes and sits down next to them and says, "Hey, can I join you guys?" And the weird nun does this strange thing where she closes her eyes at one point, and then her eyelids move like her eyes are moving really, really quickly, like she's in REM sleep behind her eyes. Yeah. That was so weird to watch, because I was thinking about it afterwards, and I was like trying to recreate it, like to see if I could even do it, and I have no idea how you actually do that. So like she has these little details where she's like a very strange person that's kind of surreal and uncanny, like she belongs in a David Lynch film instead of this movie, that I quite enjoyed. Just little details that don't really amount to anything.
Was the implication that she was another one of the botched Snoke clones? Because they they hallucinate things and have visions, don't they?
Yes.
And we know that there are, like, was she one of the like intermediate stage ones who was more successful than the others, but still not right? So she was tripping when she was doing that, or was she just there because the film thought that would be eerie and strange, and so we have to do? I think that's probably more.
It's
likely,
probably more likely that she was there just to be creepy and give us a couple of good spooks before she sets herself on fire and leaves the
it poses questions of their plan, doesn't it? Because like, why, if you wanted to keep it secret from the person who actually is your hellspawn, why would you voluntarily bring them to a place where you know that you have nuns who are essentially mental and might give the game away? Because like, if you go back to the original Omen, none of the people doing strange things are sort of invited in order to be strange. So that you have the original nanny who kills herself is shocking because nobody saw it coming. And then she's immediately replaced by somebody who's much more strong-willed and competent. And so it's all designed to put people off the scent, or put the characters off the scent in particular, not to invite them to the characters themselves to think something weird and strange is going on here. In the first Omen, though, it's the opposite. They voluntarily drag her in.
Sorry.
No. It's like,
keep going.
Sorry, I know. I was going to say, like, the characters in the first Omen do the opposite thing. That they deliberately invite the protagonist into the situation where she will be given clues which she might be at risk of unraveling, which proves to her something they want to keep hidden from her. which is only really done because the film wants them to be in that position, so she can unravel the mystery. But it doesn't make much sense from the perspective of the I guess we have to call it the church itself, to have invited her back to begin with, given that they must know that they have some mentally unwell nuns in that place that will react against her.
Yes, to follow on from that, I also don't know why they waited at all once they got her back. First of all, I don't know why they waited until she was however old she is now. You know what I mean? Like I don't know why they didn't just wait until she was like able to become pregnant. But anyway, they bring her here and then she hangs around for a while before they eventually decide, you know what, maybe we will forcibly impregnate her and create the Antichrist. I don't know why they wait at all. Like you said, I don't know why they just let her wander around and have all these weird characters that might give the whole game away. I don't understand. I don't think they sort of imply that there's only really two successful potentials, right? And it's our main character and the red herring girl. I don't think the weird manic one is anything other than, oh, she's strange, and we can have some fun scenes with her being and moving and giving a really uncanny performance, which again I do like, but I don't think it really belongs in the movie once you see the sum total of everything they're going for.
It doesn't quite achieve what the original does, because in the original one, we've got the nanny hangs herself, and then we've got the introduction. Like, she hangs herself because the dog has sort of hypnotized her, and by doing that, it opens the door for the antagonistic nanny to come in and take over that position.
The antagonistic nanny plays it really well. It's one of the high points of the movie is, like, obviously she's there to exert sort of influence and control over shaping Damien into being the true Antichrist and all that stuff. But she rides a really interesting line when she's interacting with the parents in terms of like trying to steer him in a certain way, like trying to get him out of going to church and all that sort of stuff. And like bringing in this guard dog supposedly for the sake of protecting him while he's away on business trips and, political trips and all that sort of stuff. But really who's there to protect him from anyone who would try to kill the Antichrist and all that sort of stuff. She rides the line, and there's a really interesting point where she can clearly sense that Gregory Peck had enough of the dog, and so she says, "Oh, don't worry, we got rid of the dog." Like right when Gregory Peck is on the verge of like suspecting that she's, doesn't have his best wishes at heart, she's like, "Don't worry, we got rid of the dog," and that kind of endears him again, It's like, so, we know as an audience that there's something wrong with her and that she has a nefarious influence, right? And that she has ulterior motives, but she plays it really convincingly. Whereas I feel like some of the people in this movie are there to be spooky for the sake of the movie. and that kind of undermine, not all of them, but especially this one woman who is just there to be strange. I don't quite know what her role is here other than, she's the weird one. We just keep her around because we don't know what else to do with her.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that is pretty much the reason. You think you've hit the nail on the head there, is that the only reason that she's there is to sort of have that moment, like, oh, you remember that iconic scene where the nanny says it's all for you and hangs herself. Well, we did that too. We just did it, we did it a little different. Our version is a little more special, and that's basically what you get.
This is what has fire in it. It's even better.
This is what I would cite as like a small detail that, like, in a better movie would be good. And this actress's performance as the weird one, like, I'm really quite impressed with how strange she is.
Yeah, she does a good job.
There's something very uncomfortable about looking at her on screen that I quite like. And I will say that, some of the performances are quite good. It's a shame the material kind of lets them down. So as the movie progresses, she is told by Father Brennan, this girl is being groomed to be an Antichrist. You need to find the files because if I'm correct, she will have been born on June the 6th at 6 a.m. So you need to sneak into wherever they keep the files in order to get these files to find out if she's really the Antichrist. So
at this point, by the way, because I hadn't been paying complete attention at this point, so I hadn't picked up that he was actually supposed to be the Father Brennan. And I assumed he was going to die because he does that incredibly irritating thing where he says, "Come meet me on this bench at 10 o'clock by the fountain," or whatever the fuck. And I need to tell you something. And then she goes and meets him, and then he says, You now come and meet me somewhere else so I can give you the information that I need to tell you about. It's like, no, just tell her here that you just met her. There's nothing to say. You could have said everything you need to say could have been said in this first meeting. You're going to die because this always happens in bad horror films. Now, he didn't die because, as it turns out, he can't die because he is the Father Brennan. But like, it's still a slightly convoluted approach to getting the point across that he wants to get across, which is, go find me the files to prove that they've been making snow clones, essentially.
And so eventually, we'll come to a scene where the friend who's also becoming a nun, who took her out on her sort of wild last Rumspringa type thing before she becomes a nun, she is becoming a nun, and they tell our main character that no, you can't take the vows just yet, because you have a weird attachment to this main red herring girl, and so maybe
you don't have what it takes to be one of us.
Once the final plan is revealed, what purpose does that serve?
There's exactly. I don't know. I'm
not sure. She's just asking questions that she asks about her, and this makes Bill Nye's character and like the chief old witch nun suspicious that she's maybe not on board with the plan, or she knows too much, or she's asking too many difficult questions. Because the line is that we've become concerned about you.
Yes.
But if that were the case, then why would you have boarded her to begin with? And why would you have let her interact with Red Herring Girl at all if you didn't want that to happen?
Because what we'll eventually discover is that when she's like forcibly impregnated or whatever, it like she goes from 0 to full pregnant really, really quickly.
Yeah, like, I think my question was going to be like, in addition to what does it matter if she's asking all these questions and all that? It's like, what could she realistically do to stop it now that it's already happened? Like, why do we need to step in and have this extra obstacle thrown in her way, to sort of throw her off her game or like get her to stop asking these questions? Realistically, she's not going to be able to stop anything before it happens, right? Like they're driving to get her an abortion at one point, and then she just like gets pregnant within all of 5 minutes. Like she goes from 0 to 100.
It happens very, very quickly. Yeah, it's
so like
it's
really
strange.
Realistically, what would she be able to do to stop it? Like
I don't know.
Like why did we need to throw any more obstacles in her way? She's not getting close to figuring it out, really. So like,
speaking of obstacles, they tell her that she can't be a nun just yet, and so we're at the ceremony where her friend is becoming a nun, and she's just standing there watching, and she decides, well, everyone's here, maybe now will be a good time to go see if I can find the files on our red herring girl. And so she goes away and she steals the files, and she finds a whole number of files of all the failed Snoke clones, and then she panics and becomes very stupid when it's time to try and run away with these files, where she like haphazardly throws some sort of blanket cloth.
She just wraps a dish towel around a bunch of manila envelopes, and it doesn't disguise the manila envelopes at all. She just looks like she's carrying manila envelopes wrapped in a dish towel through a crowded hallway. So I'm not really sure what she thought she was pulling off,
Yeah.
But yeah, women be hiding things, I guess.
Okay. And so, but she gets caught trying to steal these files. And so this is where we get, in a typical screenplay, we get our low point, right? We get our crisis point where our character is furthest away from their goals. She gets locked in the bad room, further tying, her journey with this red herring girl's, journey. The similarities, she gets locked in the bad room now because she gets caught trying to steal these files, and now she's locked away in the bad room. She has a couple hallucinations. We've had a couple hallucinations earlier because we need a couple spooks early on in the movie. She has a couple hallucinations here, and then you're like, okay, well, how is she going to get out of here? Because she's trapped, right? What is she going to do? Well, Priest, that we've seen basically nothing of earlier in the movie, he just comes and saves her. I remember being pretty annoyed with that because this is supposed to be like the low point of the movie, and how she gets out of this predicament is just, someone. It's almost like a Deus Ex Machina sort of thing. She's like,
he found one other good priest in the entire facility who just emerges at exactly the right time to get her out. because that's what the script needs to happen.
Of course.
It's not
And then
very well supported.
No. And then they get the plans, and then they go to meet not the plans, the files. They go to Father Brennan, and this is where we get the full reveal. If I'm remembering correctly, this is the full reveal of what their plan is, which we've already talked about how absurd it is. This is where things really start to break.
Yeah, and the way that they find out that our main character is another, potential Antichrist birther is that when she's getting dragged into the bad room, the red herring girl comes and screams over top of her, and she looks up and notices the 666 birthmark on the underside of her soft palate, basically, inside her mouth, on the underside of the roof of her mouth. So that is what turns her on to the fact that this baby in the picture actually isn't the red herring girl, because the birthmark in the picture is on her head, and the one, obviously not the same place. And so she starts feeling on her own hair and finds out, whoops, it was me all along. I'm the
Never
Antichrist.
checked there before. I've never ever worn my hair in a different style. Never combed it. Never looked at it before. Never looked in the mirror.
Shampooed.
Never shampooed it. Oh my goodness, who saw this coming?
Everyone who knows how movies work, but not anyone in the movie. A couple good questions have been posed in chat. One, how did the basement beast turn into a dead jackal? No idea. When we eventually see the beast that has been doing all this impregnating, it's pretty big. It's not the size of a jackal or a small dog. And
it has hands. It has
demon hands. There's one spooky scene that we'll eventually learn, I'm pretty sure was just a hallucination, but there's a woman who becomes pregnant.
Oh, yeah.
And then she's in not the secret place where all the occult births are happening. She's in the normal operating room, and she's giving birth. And the movie shows rather graphically, in a way that was kind of fun. The audience I saw it with, there was a lot of, they got very vocal at that point. Like a demon hand sort of comes out of the vagina of this woman. And I'm like, that's kind of spooky. Too bad it was all a hallucination, which is a little lame. Kind of fun,
And what was the point of that being a hallucination too?
I don't know.
Why are we having this men-like scene?
Actually, I do know
her
why.
Second blacking out scene, isn't it? She blacks out. She goes to the club, dances with the guy, and blacks out. Then she sees demon birth and also blacks out.
Yes,
which I suppose is that meant to establish that she's kind of an unreliable narrator to herself at this point? I don't really know.
Yeah, is she seeing the future? Is she an unreliable narrator?
What they're going for is that everything that she's been seeing, when she was younger and now as an adult, she's convinced herself, or has been convinced, that it's all fake, that it's not real, it's just an hallucination, but it's actually something like a premonition. That's what they're going for sure. That it's meaningful, because eventually she tells the younger girl, the red herring, that what the things you're seeing, they're just hallucinations, they're not real. And the little girl doesn't believe her. She thinks they are real. Eventually, when she goes to rescue her, she says, I'm so sorry. I thought they weren't real, but they are real. It's basically she's been having these visions of what they're doing to her, but they're occurring to her dreams or premonitions or hallucinations, but they're actually real. And so that brings us to the other question that was asked in chat, I think is a good question. So wait, the protagonist is the daughter of the beast thing, but it had no other effects on her other than a birthmark, visions, and she's supposedly a good person. So she is the daughter of a Satan beast thing. But otherwise, she's just a person, except for that she has a 666 birthmark and she has hallucinations. She's not evil at all. And she's not really been coerced into being evil, because I guess in the logic of the movie, she's not really the Antichrist. She's just a potential candidate to be the mother of the Antichrist. It's all very convoluted.
Yeah, because they still tease the thing that they do in the original Omen, because Father Brennan says, but the bad things will start happening around Red Herring Girl, which does sort of give you the impression that they are innately in some way evil because they have these maleffects on people around them, and yet. Yeah, as you say, there's no other evidence that these are in any way bad, satanic type of people. They are just morally normal, unfortunate women, I guess.
Yes, and I have the sneaking suspicion that part of why they're not potentially evil in the same way that Damien was evil is just because they're women. But I can't speak to what the writers were thinking when they wrote it, but that's how it seems to me. And let's see.
Hellspawn are only bad when they're man.
That's kind of an implication, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the main thing with the movie too, because he goes to warn Father Brennan. Ostensibly, I guess Father Brennan is begging Gregory Peck at this point to kill his child, right?
Yes.
But he's going to warn the other Hellspawn that people are coming to kill them, so they need to be careful because he doesn't want them to die. Because the only difference being that
it does seem to be a difference there. Yeah. The only the point working against that would only be that some of the nuns are also evil, but the implication seems to be that they're sort of it's not as overtly and obnoxiously feminist as Immaculate was. Immaculate was like as on the nose as you could possibly be, with its very obviously sort of like feminist atheist sort of messaging. This is just sort of by implication they're just the victims of this whole scenario, even though you might expect them to be weird or different or possibly potentially evil because they are literally the spawn of Satan, but they're just basically normal women, and it's only like
normal misunderstood women.
It's only the next step in this evolution that's actually potentially evil for some reason.
Got this horrid vision in my mind of some like sequel to the original film that comes after this, in which Damien's sister battles him on the side of good. Like she's the anti-Antichrist, and he's the Antichrist, and she will win, and the world will be saved.
Honestly, if they do make a sequel, I don't know what else they would do but that, based on how this
movie ends. Yeah, there's no I think you just wrote it for them, honestly.
That's the vibe I got. I mean, I got real Jessie Buckley vibes from the end of this movie. She's just an actress that I hate because she always appears in these sort of very, very obnoxiously feminist movies. Yes. Let's see. Let's get towards the end here because I know Little Platoon you'll have to leave shortly. So let's get towards the end of this plot synopsis and we can get some closing thoughts from you. We are at the point now where they try to take the little girl away and then a car crashes into them. There's a couple things along the way. Eventually we realize that the man she was dancing with at the club is actually in on it too.
Somehow, right, which is like one of the Rosemary's Baby moments, and I wanted to say this is probably the moment where she reconnects with him in the street. Like she just sees him in the street and starts following him, and he starts running away, crying about how he didn't know, and then he gets hit by a car. This is probably the moment that took me out of it the most. Is when he gets hit by the car and she runs up to him and they have this this sort of emotional thing where she's like, no, you're gonna be okay, and she kind of grabs him under his armpits, and the next thing you know she just rips him in half and she's holding
it's very stupid.
It's so dumb, dude.
And the way it's played, she's surprised that the rest of him didn't come with him, as if you'd be struggling so much harder to hold him if it was all of him, but
she doesn't realize until somebody else in the street screams in terror, and then she's like, "Oh fuck, he ain't got no legs," and she drops.
Yeah. It's very silly.
Oh my god!
What was the implication about his actual involvement in this? I might not have been paying proper attention at this point, but he's not technically part of this conspiracy.
No, he's not in on it.
No, he is
a nun. He meets up with her in a bar. Now he knows what she is in some vague, nebulous way, and is scared about that.
So the implication is that he was the implication is that they just kind of manipulated him into it. They brought him along to the ceremony for getting her pregnant, basically watching her get fucked by the devil. But he didn't know her. He was not aware of who she was. He has no ties to the rest of the cult at all. So why he's even there is a great question. It seems very much like a deliberate attempt to ape Rosemary's Baby, where the person who she kind of trusts is in on it because he's getting something out of it. He doesn't seem to have gotten anything out of it, really, because we don't see him very much at all through the rest of the movie after that.
I'm remembering now that when she's, I guess, impregnated by this devil thing is the implication is that it happens on their night out. She gets really drunk and then it happens then.
So his
that,
whole role must have just been to seduce her.
I take back what I said earlier about like waiting to get it started, like with her. They do it right away, but I guess what's weird thinking about it now is that she's not pregnant, not pregnant, not pregnant. Holy shit, she's super pregnant. I don't quite know how that works, but yeah. So he, I guess, was manipulated and feels kind of bad about it, but he was part of the setup to, I guess, get her really drunk and out of her mind so that we could do the sort of.
Yeah, well, and what's weird
how
too,
secretive they are, though. Like you just basically put a huge hitch in your potential plan. Your secret cloister of evil, satanic nuns has basically found a randomer on the street and said, "Hey, come help us get this girl pregnant because evil." And then they just hope that he's not going to go and like tell anyone, even in casual conversation. Haha, funny thing, these nuns that they paid me to bone this girl or something. Like
Yeah, they
it
don't
seems
need it at all.
clumsy.
and what's strange is they don't even need him. They've got her roommate. They've got her roommate on the payroll, and she is
So they go
like
out-
deep in the pockets. So like it could have just been her getting her friend drunk, and then taking her away from him, and then you could have even had a slight heroic arc for him trying to figure out like what happened to her after that night if you really wanted to include him.
Yeah,
which would have been something, but like he doesn't need to be there at all. There's no point in having him, really. It's just like he could have been there and like kind of seduced her, and then the friend could have got her drunk and then taken her away and brought her beneath the church, and he could have been like, hey, what happened to you? Your friend, you and your friend disappeared. I never even got your number, that kind of thing, right? But now he was there, he was in on it, and he is apologetic, and then gets hit by a car before he can reveal what he watched happen to her.
That he was there and watched it happen.
Yeah,
kind of seals his fate a little bit.
He's not even like in on the plot, so I don't get like it's not. It doesn't feel good to get hit for him to die. Like it's not like he got his comeuppance for betraying somebody to this fate. It's just like. Sucks to suck, buddy. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time.
I guess so. Yeah. Well, I suppose we're going to build up to the final climax here, but Platoon, I understand that you need to head out. Is that correct?
I can push it for another 15, I reckon. I stupidly double booked myself, but since I was late to this one, I can be late to the next one. It's fair.
All right. That's what I like to hear. So let's push through to the climax, where I remember when I was watching this movie in the theater, I was enjoying it well enough. Like I said, when we finally get the reveal of what their plan is, that's when things started to unravel for me. But there were some fun spooks along the way, just some spooky moments and scenes and aspects of it. I was very, very, very disappointed by the climax of this movie. I don't know about you guys as well, but it really felt like a wet fart. I remember thinking while I was watching it, like, man, I can't wait for this movie to like finally go there. And it never did. We get to the climax. They're captured. Well, actually, before they're captured, they're driving away, and they're going to try to go get her an abortion for whatever's growing inside of her. And they get like T-boned by another car. And then everyone else appears to be dead. They're like incapacitated.
Incapacitated at the very least, because we know Father Brennan's not dead. Because
I guess so. Yes,
because he's going to die later. Yes. She was on the side that got directly boned by the other car. Gets out just fine. The others are all knocked the fuck out. She's totally
slightly awkward, given the original film establishes that falling off of a balcony is a pretty good way to induce an abortion. And this film's like car crash.
I took notes.
So she gets out of the car, and then she does something that I was very confused by in hindsight. She just starts writhing around.
Oh, she does her Zombieland audition. Right in the middle of this. And it goes on for far too long. Time. When she's just like she's doing she's popping the locket around.
She's popping the locket. I'm like, is she going to give birth right here? I thought maybe that's what they were going to do.
I thought that was what was going to happen when she broke her water the opposite direction. Like she just vomits a bunch of clear liquid in the car. and asks what's happening to her. I'm like, what the fuck is happening there? Like, there's like, okay, that's...
Is she going to give birth out of her mouth? Like, what is happening? The funniest interpretation of what might have happened here came from my girlfriend when we went to see this movie. We were talking about it afterwards. She's like, I thought she was going to turn into the jackal.
That would have made way more sense.
The way she's writhing around is kind of weirdly animalistic, so it would have been very funny if very, very strange if that's what happened here, is that she literally turns into a jackal. That's not what happens. She writhes around in a way that the movie is clearly like, oh man, what a performance, right? I'm like, but it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't do anything. She writhes around for a while, and then they're like, all right, we're gonna capture you now. And that's the end of that scene.
And it's not any more it's not any more impressive or interesting to watch than like your average extra on The Walking Dead was at one point. So it's like it's like 2.5 to 3 minutes long watching this happen. It's a really long cut. I'm not a fan of that part at all.
Underwhelming. And then she gets captured. Next thing you know, if I'm not mistaken, she's in the sort of bowels, the catacombs of this sort of monastery place, and she's being tied down, kind of like we saw earlier in the movie. And she, I guess, is going to give birth to the devil spawn now. And the way that scene plays out, I also thought was rather underwhelming. They performed something like a C-section on her, but like it's not especially spooky or gruesome compared to anything that came before it. So it turns out it's twins. One of them is Damien, and the other is going to be the Antichrist. We can only hope.
Damien.
And they say something like we see shots of like the devil's hand on her and stuff like that.
Well, she has like a flashback revelation of realizing that she's been impregnated by the devil or something like that. Yeah.
And so
then there's like a really gross C-section scene where like they cut her open. Like it's pretty effective. The scene that they do where she's being cut open by the doctor and he sticks his bare hands in her. That would grossed me out a little bit. I'm not like. He just sticks his bare hands in her cut open stomach. It's a little gross.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. It felt very underwhelming.
You have to do if you don't really have any like proper story reason to be horrifying, I think. Because there's no equivalent scene in The Omen in the 70s, and that might be a part of general good taste. But I think it's also because they had a bit more confidence in the story they were telling and the concepts being themselves horror. Whereas you tend to find that if a film is a horror, nominally a horror, but it's struggling to really be particularly horrifying in its story, then it's just, well, what's the quickest, easiest, cheapest way we can get that? Oh, gross out. That's a good way of doing it. Jump scares and gross out. That's
There were a few moments like this that felt rather cheap and generic early on in the movie, especially. I was like, oh, that's unfortunate. Why did we do that?
Oh yeah, like that scene where where she sees a nun in her habit hanging on the wall.
Yeah.
Why is that?
And she goes, ah, and then it cuts.
Yeah.
She makes some stupid noise. That felt very generic as well. This movie isn't full of jump scares the way some movies are. There's little moments of startling, but I was reasonably impressed with the restraint in that regard only. Otherwise, a lot of the spooks were pretty generic and a little cliche. When it comes time to this final scene, all they really have is like, isn't it gross to see a C-section? I'm like, I guess. And so
an unsanitary C-section. Yeah, that's basically all they've got.
Yeah. They pull out the babies and they're like, oh, it's twins. It's like, well, we only need the boy. Leave the other two to die. And so they light everything on fire and leave our main character and her newborn girl to die. And then they take everything, they light everything on fire. And then we see the room where the beast is in, and the beast is also on fire. I don't...
Yeah, they burn it alive, basically.
What is happening? I don't understand this at all.
They're not covering their trail. Again, the original Omen establishes that when they make the baby swap, they actually do kill the unnecessary baby. They do smash its head in. So why would you get to this point and say, oh, we've accidentally birthed, buy one get one free Antichrist. We only need one. We'll just leave the other one. It's fine. Someone else will deal with that, but we won't kill it. Like, why? Why aren't you doing that? You will do it later on. So,
If anything, it would have been more bleak and brutal if they just like, not that you'd want to show it necessarily, but they literally just kill it with a rock or something. That would be like, oh yeah, they're definitely evil. The other thing is when they had backups of potential candidates, they kept both of them, but they don't keep both of the twins. And then furthering the point that there is a sort of like they can't help themselves with a sort of feminist tint to it. Like they need the Antichrist to be a boy. And so they're like, oh, we have a girl, we'll just leave it to die. Like it's a sort of like China one-child policy sort of thing. Like, okay, sure. And then so they light everything on fire, but don't like stay to make sure they're dead. And then they kill the beast. I want to talk about the beast because this thing is a monster.
I'm dying to talk to you about the beast all day.
It's not an animal, right? It's a demonic monster. Where did they get this thing? Is this literally the devil? Why do they need an antichrist if they have the devil?
Yeah, I mean, like they don't do us the like the decency of giving us a Rosemary's Baby type situation where it is the devil, but it can only appear in the mortal plane in one particular instance if they do a ritual.
Yeah.
They don't give us that honor. It's just they've got it chained up in the basement of the fucking church. Like that's where they're keeping the literal devil. Because I mean, that's
I have to respond to someone in chat who said it's the jackal they burn. That's not a jackal. I know what a jackal looks like. It looks kind of like a coyote. That's like a werewolf monster. That's not like, and it has demonic hands. It's not a jackal. It's a demon.
It would not have produced the skeleton that we see in that tomb in the first movie, because the skeleton that we see in the tomb of the first movie straight up is like just looks like a Rottweiler. Like it just looks like a dog.
Yeah, it's also small. The thing that they burn alive. I don't know why they burned it alive either. Like, isn't this a demon that's like part of their whole? I guess in their stupid heads they think, oh, we're only birthing the Antichrist to bring people back to the church. So once we've had our fill with this demon, we'll kill the demon too. Where did they get the demon? How did they summon a demon?
How did they?
I wish they just stuck with the jackal. The jackal's way more horrifying. Like again, the original film, just seeing the skeleton and then you say, "Oh, it was a jackal," and then your mind starts thinking, "Wait, how does that work?" And then your mind says, "Well, actually, I really don't want to know how that works because that's kind of disgusting." That's good. I like that sort of horror. I don't need it to be transmogrified into weird like Satan jackal. That's just cheap.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, it's the opposite. It's the opposite thing. Yeah. Like the whole idea that a human-ish child born from an animal, right? Like it's not an immaculate conception. It's like the reversal of that, right? Like the devil has impregnated, the Lady Porcupiney and given birth to his child, which will, it comes from the animal world, not from the human, right? That's a different thing. And so then we've now reversed that to he wasn't born out of a female jackal. His father was an animal demon monster thing. His mother was just an unfortunate woman who got caught up in, basically she didn't ask to be born, but she was. And so here she is, right? Like it is a complete reversal of the mythology.
They gender reversed the Omen.
Yeah, it's a reversal of the mythology of like that whole idea, right? And like if you are Catholic, right? Like let's say this is your plan, right? Is like we need to create enough evil, enough controlled evil to bring these secular hippies who are ruining everything back to the light of the Lord. What we need to do is create this male heir who's going to cause enough chaos that they'll all turn back, and then we can get rid of him, right? Like, sure, fine. It's a stupid plan, but it is a plan. You would think, even though it is a dumb plan, that they would have some level of control, like, okay, we don't want too much of this getting out there because that could create problems for us later, Like, if that's your plan, why not just make sure you kill the extras, get rid of them, make sure they're dead, and then, like, why give him away so that now he's going to be, like, completely out of your hands? Except, for the random nanny who's going to show up and the hellhounds and all that. It just, we're way beyond the pale of, like,
the big sticking point for me with their whole stupid plan is that somehow they've summoned a demon who's impregnating women and then impregnating the offspring of those women to create the Antichrist. And all these people still think they're doing the work of the Lord. You know? Like, how do you not see like the obvious sort of like horrific satanic pagan sort of stuff you're doing and be like, are we the baddies? Like, are we like it's unreal to me.
We've
But
summoned
yes,
evils of unspeakable horror. Are we doing the right thing? Of course we are. Of course we are.
It's like, well, the other thing is like no Catholic thinks that like Jesus is like that what they ought to do is help facilitate the end of the world on behalf of the devil so that we can speed things up. Like that's not
At best, their intention is to kill him before it gets too far out of hand. Like, right? Yeah. Like, that's, at best, their idea is we're just going to cause a little apocalypse. Yeah. Just enough so that people start coming back to the church. You know, so that way...
I want to know, I really want to know how they got this beast.
That's a great question. Where did it come from?
Setting that aside, they leave them to die in the fire, but then they're saved. Who saves? Isn't it the red herring girl that saves them?
Yeah, the red herring girl comes down and just like escorts her out. Like, it's so weird too because they're gonna leave her to die, but they still sew up the C-section scar anyway. Like they take the time to stitch her up, even though they're planning on leaving her to die.
You know, that's funny. You're right. I didn't even think about that. Otherwise, she'd be running around with the big gaping wound.
Yeah. So they stitch her up, but then like a teenager comes in and just is like, "Hey, wait! You got to get up, and we got to go this way." And that's how they escape. You know, like it's
lame.
It's really lame. There's
we get one little scene where they're talking about like they have a little profile on who Gregory Peck is and the ambassador, and they're like, "Oh, this is the guy you're going to meet." To give them, and I'm like, okay, cool, we're connecting with the Omen, sure. And then they do that thing that feels more like a post-credit scene, except that it happens at the end of the movie instead, where like we talked about it already, but they're living in a cabin, and it's like 3 spawn of Satan girls all having a nice happy time together, talking about drinking hot cocoa or whatever. And then Father Brennan's like, they're gonna come for you. They know you're alive somehow. I have no idea.
Just an average sorority, honestly.
Yeah. They're having fun, and he's like, they're going to come for you. Oh, and by the way, your son, his name is Damien. Musical sting, the end. It's an awful end.
Like, I almost wonder whether the first scene in the movie should have been this scene. Sorry, no, I'll put that a different way. I almost wonder whether we should have cut that scene, the actual end scene of this film, and put the first scene of the movie in its place as the ending. So you twist a couple of bits here and there in the doing of it. You keep Father Brennan out of it as much as is possible. It's a story about the girl in the orphanage, and she discovers all of this for herself, and she escapes. And like all of that shit, as most of it is, pans out as normal. And then at the end of the film, you get this mysterious vicar priest chap, Charles Dance's character, who summons this Father Brennan and says, "This has happened. Some bad shit will go down. You need to stop it." And that's your tie-in to the original Omen, because that sets Brennan off on his mission. And then you could have had Charles Dance's character as like one of the people involved in proceedings that we'd seen previously. Like that feels like a much more natural way to tie these two things together than trying to tie them together with the mention of the ambassador and then jumping away to this random scene in the little happy family life. It's just it's really disjointed doing it that way.
I agree that it's a much more natural way of doing it, even if a bit like cliche.
Even if still a bit clunky, just because like in the first one, Father Brennan was part of the group that summoned Satan, or like that caused the thing.
Yeah. They forgot that.
They've forgotten about that entirely in this movie. So like, sure.
Very, very, very strange film. Not good.
It's almost like if you smashed this one and that Immaculate movie together, you might have something relatively coherent that could function.
Well, that was surprising because Immaculate is not a good movie. If there's any sort of feminist tendencies in this movie, they're way more obnoxious in Immaculate. Also, Sydney Sweeney is just not a good actress. I'm sorry. I don't like. she's not, I don't like her at all. And Immaculate is a piece of shit movie. But
she's got two massive globes of talent, I think.
And I don't know why those globes, they hypnotize people into thinking she's a good actress. I don't quite understand it. But the funny thing is that the plan in Immaculate would actually work better here. That's something I wasn't expecting, but it's very true. The idea of trying to bring back Jesus in order to stop the sort of tide
in order to
atheism,
get the filthy hippies to quit with their bullshit and their Hare Krishnas. Bring them back to the light.
Like, trying to forcibly bring back Jesus results in the Antichrist instead. That's actually, there's something there, believe it or not.
I'll submit it to the studio. Maybe they'll. Given they've already made two of exactly the same movie, I'm sure a slight twist on both won't be too much beyond them.
Yeah.
Well, nobody went and saw this, so we could probably get away with it.
Probably, yes. Well, that we've gone through both movies. This seems like a good place to set you free, little Platoon. Why don't you leave us with some closing thoughts about the Omen and the first Omen?
The original Omen is a good film, and the first Omen is not a good film. It's one of those things. It worked once, and it's brilliant. And I think we should be happy that we can make one really good thing occasionally, and we shouldn't feel the need to keep stringing it out over the course of decades in many other films. And yet, inexplicably, we do, and the result tends to be the same each time, which is that it makes less and less money and costs far more to make. So if you can pretend in your own mind that there's only one Omen film, you'll probably be much happier. But if, on the other hand, it's your job to review these things, we unfortunately have to live with the first Omen as well.
Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Good sir.
Thank you for having me.
Enjoy whatever you're going on to next.
Yes, another stream. I almost had 3 today that backed up, and I managed to offload one of them. But
yeah, I'm a busy boy. You were
not
on EFAP yesterday, and you just released a new video on your second
FNT
channel
on Friday as well. And the second channel video. That, to be fair, the second channel video is cheating because that's like a small part of a big main channel video that isn't out yet. So it was just a case of cutting it up. And
I'm looking forward.
Yeah, me too.
To that. It's on Dune as well. It's Dune Part 2, right? Or both of them? Are you reviewing?
It's probably going to be both, which is why it's so long, and why it might take an even longer time to come out. But in the meantime, there should be a Godzilla X Kong video out this week because that film is special.
Yes, the link to his channel is in the description. If you don't know him, you should go check him out. He's good at this sort of thing. He reviews movies. Go check him out. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your night.
We'll see you.
See you later.
Before we continue talking, I wanted to respond to a super chat we got back at the beginning of the stream. He says, "Look at me, Devs episode 4. It's all for you." Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Much to look forward to. If you're into that sort of thing, Devs 4 should be out very shortly. And
before Civil War, right?
Before Civil War. That's the plan. It'll definitely be done by then, and then it'll kind of rely on how long it takes Disney to relinquish the copyright control.
That's next week, yeah.
Yes.
Ooh, baby. Am I excited for that? There were a lot of I've seen some commercials, Jamie, calling Civil War a masterpiece.
It's gonna be something. I'm not usually this certain about things, but the movie is going to suck. I can feel it in my bones. If however it actually is as good as something like Ex Machina, I'll be the first to admit it, but I don't have high hopes.
God, I would love that.
I know
if
Alex
I actually
Garland
get to go to a movie theater and enjoy myself.
What, you didn't enjoy yourself with the first Omen?
Oh wow! You know that thing that happens sometimes where you leave the movie theater, and there were only maybe 5 other people in the theater, and you don't say anything to each other, but you catch each other's eye in the hallway while you're waiting for the bathroom at the end, and you both know you just sat through dog shit, and you don't have to say anything, but you just laugh. That happened with 3 other people at this movie. We were all just kind of, well. And then we went our separate ways.
I will say, I think calling this movie dog shit is a little harsh, just a little bit. I would just call it bad. Only because this is not.
It's not abysmal.
I can't
yeah,
hate this movie.
I
can't
well,
hate it.
Yeah, I mean, I just was bored for a good portion of it. I was like, I would really just prefer that this was over. I'd like to go home and watch the original.
It was a long 2 hours. It's only 2 hours long, but it feels longer than that. And I think part of it is like very uneven pacing and like a final climax that feels like we have nothing really left to learn or do. So it kind of drags on. It's unfortunate. I've had much more miserable experiences watching a movie in the theater than this. This one did have
laugh out loud at quite a few parts, I will admit.
There's a couple moments in this that it's generic modern horror movie stuff, but there are moments in this like when the demonic hand comes out of the woman's vagina in that one hallucination. That got like a pretty fun audible reaction out of my audience. There was a guy who yelled hell no. Stuff like that. It's like that's fun. That's why you go see horror movies in the theater. But when this movie ended, everyone just kind of like went, "Oh, okay." And, like there's a real sense of disappointment in the air, like hanging in the air when everyone left. It was just like, "Oh, I guess, yeah, that was a movie, all right." This is a strange movie. It's not good. It has it falls into a lot of pitfalls that a lot of modern horror movies does. But there are some things about it that are slightly better, such that like when things go really stupid, you're like, "Oh, come on! I thought you were going to do better than that." I was pleasantly surprised at the lack of jump scares, for example.
Yeah, me too.
I thought that the setting was interesting. I thought some of the characters in the beginning felt kind of nuanced and realistic. All that gets kind of thrown out the window by the end. But like Bill Nighy, for example, is very likable in the beginning of the movie. When you find out his plan, like he's the one at the end who says what the plan is, and hearing Bill Nighy trying to make this dialogue work, it's just like, oh, you poor thing. Like this plan is so stupid, and I think
yes,
because there's no way to sell it. This plan is retarded. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah, it's funny too because like I'm so used to like he was a villain in Underworld, which is I think the first time I ever really engaged with him as a performer. And so whenever I see him, I do get an almost sinister vibe at like, especially if it's in a movie that I know is going to be a horror movie. I'm like, you spent the money on getting him in here. He's gonna be a bad guy. Right. Yeah. So like, obviously, like I was already distrustful of him.
Telegraphed.
Yeah.
I knew for certain he was going to be bad, but in the beginning,
he's charming. Yeah, he's a very charming.
And I like his description of like the current state of political unrest, where he's like, "Oh, the young people, they don't look to the authority or the government. They don't look to the church anymore for guidance. Maybe you can help us change that." I'm like, that is what a person like that would say. That he turns out to be evil, and that his plan was to, okay, so what we got to do is got to scare these fuckers back into the church. So we're going to ritually impregnate women with a hell spawn. Yeah,
with a hell spawn. We're going to ritually impregnate a hell spawn with a hell spawn. And that was another thing that I kind of started to get on my nerves a little bit at the end of the movie is, these are all literally the spawn of Satan, if we're going with the lore from the original one. I guess it's the spawn of a weird werewolf jackal demon in this one. So it's a little different. But these are all literally the spawn of Satan. Why am I rooting for them to survive? They're a problem. You should probably get rid of them.
This is. I'm glad you mentioned that, because this movie posits the same sort of thing that Poor Things does. Poor Things is like, okay, because Poor Things, she's a monster, right?
Yes.
She is a fetus's brain implanted miraculously and scientifically into an adult woman, but then she just becomes basically a normal person by the end. And I'm like, that's not how this would work. Like, you know what I mean? You can't just do that. You can't like have this main character literally be the spawn of a human being and a devil monster, and she's basically just a normal woman. Not literally in the story. Like normal, except for that she has some like premonitions sometimes.
I mean, all I'm saying is, who got us kicked out of the garden?
Yeah, you know what I mean though. Like it's just there's this weird implication that like, oh well, even though your dad was Satan, if you're a woman, you're not evil. It's like, what are we doing? What are we
No,
doing?
that was a big problem that I had with the movie was that, and I brought that up a little bit, but it's just that like if woman, then fine. But like Damien, Damien is not going to get that same treatment if they keep going with these, because like this is clearly meant to launch a new franchise, like a rebooted Omen franchise, right? Like they gave us the Gregory Peck thing, but they gave us essentially an Avengers post-credits scene at the end of the movie. Like clearly this is supposed to launch some new line of films, right? They did not spend the money on this for a one-off and like create a character like Damien's sister and then just leave it. Like it's gonna make a reappearance if this makes any money at all. If this makes any money at all, it's gonna make a reappearance. But the only reason that that's in this movie is because the female version of Damien is like a victim. Right? It's not like the female version of Damien is a victim, not a literal embodiment of evil, not the literal child of the devil that's going to destroy humanity. Like that's one of those things that really like bothered me about the movie is that by the end of it, it's like it's very clear what direction or what moral they're taking, what moral view they're taking of this, and it's a little irritating to co-opt something that I think like you don't need to co-opt. Like it's a good story already. The whole Antichrist, Christianity story, that's a good story already. Like it works time and time again. We've got any number of apocalyptic stories, right? It works well. You are taking it and basically telling me that a woman would have fixed the problem, right? Like that's basically what they're telling me in this movie.
That might be where it goes, yes. And just to piggyback on what you're saying, someone in the chat said, "Have you considered church bad?" There's a little bit of that in this movie, obviously, in that like almost everyone at this monastery, including the main priest Bill Nye, but also the head nuns, all these people are in on it. The only thing working against the whole religion bad interpretation is the fact that Father Brennan, who said he has been excommunicated for his view, so he's almost like
that was a weird drop too.
Yeah, he's like one of the good ones, so to speak. But he says something to the effect of like there are two churches. There's like the actual Church of Christ, and there's the church who just wants power. And so, in defense of the movie, I would say the interpretation is more like the Catholic Church as an institution is just like corrupt and just wants power or whatever, but then there are actually good Christians as well. But it's just that in this movie, it's like everyone of authority and all the main people at the monastery are actually evil and have this really stupid, bizarre plan. You know what I mean? There is a very sort like the authority of the church and all that sort of stuff is to be treated with suspicion, and fear even.
And what we didn't talk about is that Bill Nye doesn't actually seem to be the head priest of this monastery orphanage thing. There's a different guy, a different priest that they show in one of the scenes where the main character is walking through and being introduced to everybody. There's a different guy who's just sitting there smoking a cigarette at his desk who we never once get to meet.
Oh, that's true. You're right. Yeah, because Bill Nye is a priest in America.
He's like a cardinal or something. He's an American cardinal. Like
but he's involved. Rome. He shows up at the final ceremony. He's part of it. And to Jay Jameson in the chat, I know you're not necessarily saying that the main thesis of the movie is church bad, but I just wanted to take that as a question because just in terms of this movie's attitude towards religion and church, there's an unwillingness to keep the same attitude towards religion that the Omen has, and that movies like The Exorcist and even Rosemary's Baby have. There's a sort of modern tendency, like where it can't be that. It has to be like the outsider figures who are the good ones and the church is corrupt and that sort of thing. Even if this movie does have a sort of like, oh, well, there are some good ones, like Father Brennan is positioned as like one of the good religious folk here. And I think to the movie's credit, like the main character is religious. I mean, we don't get a sense of like what her religious views are after the fact, but you know what I mean. She's a pretty devout Christian, if I understand correctly.
Yeah. Well, I think
that might change. I don't know what they're going for in terms of where this story could continue, but there does seem to be a sort of modern, especially progressive tendency to like the wouldn't allow you to do a prequel to the Omen justice. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
for sure.
like
Well, because you can't treat the church as if there's anybody moral within it. You have to like really like anybody moral within it has to have been kicked to the outside. And now what I did like in the couple episodes so far that I've seen of it, and I'm curious if it continues, but I know that in the source material this is a big deal. In Shogun, they do handle this in a much, I would say, much better way, where there are good people in that church who are just trying to do what they think is the right thing, and the complexities of the story tend to inform everything else around it.
Are you talking about sorry, I haven't seen all the episodes yet. I've only seen 3, so don't spoil anything for me.
I've still only seen 2.
Are you talking about the Portuguese characters?
Some of them, yes. There's the one guy who's been teaching Mariko how to speak Portuguese.
Yeah, there are some. There are nice shades of gray in that, from what I've seen so far.
So far, I'm very pleased with the portrayal of these people, because and this is interesting, because I had a conversation with somebody I know recently about how it'll be interesting to see where Shogun goes given the history of that story, but the Toranaga, the real life version of Toranaga, does become a shogun and does end up like that movie Silence that Martin Scorsese made about the Christians who get stuck in Japan and get tortured to death, basically, for their beliefs. The guy Toranaga, the real character who he's based off of, the real historical figure he's based off of, is the guy who started that, which is an interesting dynamic to see how they're going to handle. But I mentioned this to one of my friends, and this friend told me, like, well, good. And I was like, there are a lot of really good people who died in horrific ways because of that. I don't think that's necessarily something that we can say blanket statement, good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, this brings up an interesting point to me. This is something that has been annoying me for a while about sort of how religion and sort of spiritual beliefs are handled in stories. There seems to be, where they're allowed to be shown faithfully or authentically, is in cultures that aren't our own. That is like either American or Western or Christian, where they can be treated seriously. And then it feels like when we're depicting, Christians or even, sort of like the pagan religions of like, I don't know, like I feel like there's this weird tendency where like, we'll treat some like the sort of religious and spiritual philosophies of other cultures with respect, but not our own. Like it's like seeing 2 movies in a row, Immaculate and this one, where it's just like, oh, the church is bad, like where both movies are clearly inspired by movies like Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist and The Omen, obviously, but none of them will, even for the sake of the story, just like accept that the religions are true in the narrative, which is what those movies do. You know what I mean? There's something really quite annoying about it. It's one of the things I really liked about Dune Part 2. I think it kind of bypasses that tendency to look askance at religion and spirituality and stories by setting it in a sci-fi setting. It's a totally made-up culture, especially, and like, you know what I mean? Like, we can explore those themes in a way that feels more authentic to how people who believe those things actually were, and how like pre-modern people, or like, how they viewed the world and stuff like that. And that seems to be only well and authentically expressed in stories about other cultures and not our own. And that's something that I find kind of annoying at this point. It's not even necessarily that I'm like a hardcore Catholic and think that these movies are like offensive necessarily. It's just like, well, could we just like treat them how they would actually be for once? You know what I mean? Like, could they, like, what if it was just authentic and we could like explore it and make up our own minds?
Ask some of these writers if you're allowed to be this critical of Islam and see what they say. That's all. Like,
yeah,
that's
well, there's that for sure. And I think the willingness to accept and tolerate criticism is a good thing, as opposed to Islam, for example. But it's just, I would like to see more. It's just fun. Like, I don't consider myself a hyper religious person, but watching movies like The Omen, it is just fun to, at least for the sake of the story, just accept it as true and like see where that takes you.
I mean, like, you've literally got a demon chained up in the bottom of a church, like I am totally fine with the idea of like, if there is a demon, there is an angel. You can include that. You don't have to tiptoe around this idea. Right,
that's something we've talked about before. Yeah,
we've talked about that with a lot of stuff, because like even the stuff we like that tends to like go for this kind of thing, like Buffy, for example. Buffy is a great example of this, where they sort of tiptoe around the idea that the religiosity is important, or that the existence of demons and monsters must imply the existence of angels and like a higher power that is good. They sort of tiptoe around that, and that's probably one of the more interesting aspects of the show. Like, maybe one of the bigger failings of the show is that it does tiptoe around that and pretend sort of like it pays lip service to it, and it works in a way, like,
yeah.
But it does kind of leave you wondering, like, if you were a religious person looking at this, would you be kind of like, I mean, you can use a crucifix to stop a vampire, but why are there demons and no angelic personality?
You're watching it and you're like, why does the crucifix stop a vampire?
Yeah.
I mean, like, that sort of thing. Someone, Jay, has said in the chat, it's a whole tearing down a fence analogy, or the person to understand why the fence is there. There's something to that, especially if you're going to attach yourself to a franchise, It's one thing to create an entirely new story, as like Immaculate does, where you have this very surface level, rather unnuanced and uninteresting sort of modern feminist look at, the church, that sort of thing. And it's like, this is all very predictable. This is what you would think, of course. But especially if you're going to attach yourself to something like The Omen, you would, I would hope, like, treat the premise of the story seriously. Like, in The Omen, like, God is real, like Christianity is real, and people, there are these people who are trying to summon the devil, and I don't know. It's the kind of thing that annoys me. I would just really like to see like religious people and institutions and stuff like that treated authentically. Not necessarily that, because I don't want like Christian propaganda movies, because those tend to suck, right?
Yeah.
It's just like,
yeah. I want to make that clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't need the perfect priest coming in and saving the day, but the way The Exorcist treats it, where there's the older priest who's kind of like the wise figure, and the younger one who's questioning his faith, but who ends up doing the right thing, sacrificing himself to save a child, an innocent child who just got caught up in the thing. That's how it should be handled,
Yes, I totally agree. And the other thing that works really well about The Exorcist too is that the mom, part of what's scary about The Exorcist is that the mom is like trying every modern secular thing to solve this problem, and then kind of like reluctantly goes to church because she has nowhere to turn, right? And then the main priest is someone who's struggling with this faith, not someone who comes in like a Gary Stu Vin Diesel style and is like, it's about family, and he just like has the right answer.
You just gotta believe and drive fast.
Yeah, believe.
You just gotta, that demon's granny shifting, not double clutching like he should.
Yeah. I'm just picturing Vin Diesel in The Exorcist now. Oh, that would be so funny.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
I would love
The
that.
Omen, it's a bit cheesy and corny in how it incorporates Christian symbolism, and it it gets some things wrong, so to speak, but it's fun and simple and straightforward in a way that really works. And this movie just doesn't feel like it understands any of that.
Yeah, no, this movie does. Yeah, I mean, and that's really the flaw with trying to do a religious movie nowadays, in particular, because like The Nun is also ostensibly one of those, nominally a religious movie. It's about a nun in a monastery kind of thing.
But she's evil, and she's
Yeah,
scaring
well,
folks.
but all
Going,
nuns are evil and scary. Like that's basically the takeaway from that movie, is that like there is no real benefit to the spirituality thing. Spirituality has always just been a way to control people. That's basically, the idea. It's a very Marxist sort of take on things, and not one that I'm particularly fond of. Because I do I do think that there have been instances in history where like it has served the better side of humanity to have some kind of unifying belief.
But just to reduce it to that, it's a very dumb modern perspective.
There's been bad that goes along with it. Don't get me wrong, but
but that's what this movie seems to be doing. It takes that approach. It's like, the real villains here are like the Catholic Church, who are trying to scare people back into the church because really they just want power and control. And it's just like, first of all, I don't think this will do well, partly because, is that typing into the zeitgeist, really? I don't think it is. You know what I mean? I think certain movies really tap into something because, The Omen tapped into something, right? Because this is almost the opposite of The Omen in some ways.
That's a good point.
And The Omen tapped into something.
Yeah, 1976 was not a particularly optimistic era of the United States,
No, and partly, I think it came up in our conversation, The Omen is almost more worried about, secularism and the future of the world and how things are developing. But this movie can't take the perspective that secularism is bad, so they have to concoct a way for really it to just be religion's fault. Even if there are some good religious people, it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this one, I don't see this resonating with anyone because I don't think this taps into what
this I can't think of it. I mean, so there is a parallel to be drawn between the world, the way that we, live in the world and engage with the world today, and the 1970s, because everything is very pessimistic, right?
There's a pessimism.
There's a pessimism about the world at the moment. I had a friend who told me the other day that Ready Player One kind of predicted the future, because look how bad the world, look how far gone the world is today. Isn't it just so much easier and more pleasant to sit around and play video games all day than engaging with the world, because it's such a hellscape, right? Somebody legitimately told me something along those lines the other day, and that seems to be kind of a common theme when you talk to people regularly, which is bizarre to me, because I would say that I don't feel that quite the same way. But there is a way that the Omen could tap into it, you could get that idea. Obviously the Omen has some resonance for people living through an era like that, where everything is very, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of hope moving forward. And there's all this talk, I think, everywhere about America, the end of the American empire. I've heard a lot of, we're living at the decline of the the American empire.
Every communist ever is talking about late stage capitalism. I'm like, that's optimistic from your perspective. It doesn't seem like it's going anywhere, but sure, what I mean? Yeah, but to your point, that it does feel like the end of something. It feels like the end of a world for a lot of people, and this movie and a lot of horror movies that have come out. They don't feel like they're
not tapping into that the way that the ones in the 70s used to be able to do, you know? Like, and I don't know exactly what it is that they're like, maybe it's the fact that this one tries to end it on a positive note. That could be a contributing factor. Like the Omen, the original one ends very bleakly and ends with, I mean, it literally ends with the Antichrist being brought into the White House, which is really funny if you think about it in 1976. What is this, like, who was that? Jimmy Carter, who was president at that point. But Gerald Ford, even, oh, good Lord. But yeah, no, like it's just bizarre, you know? It's just really bizarre that horror movies haven't been able to take advantage of that element and maybe we're just too close to it. I don't know. Doesn't seem like it. But you would think that they would be able to tap into that zeitgeist and grab some level of, you know, poignance the way the Omen or the Exorcist does, with the idea that like a movie could end on a sour note for the protagonist is something that's very unique to the 70s that we just haven't really started to replicate. It's interesting. It's interesting to think about. New Soma. Yeah, no, Huxley was right about a lot of things. Huxley was a very interesting guy.
Yeah.
I think he called it on some of that. But yeah, no, what I was saying was like it's interesting that no horror movie has managed to really like grasp that same level. Like the 70s had there's pessimism now like there was in the 70s, but the horror movies of the 70s and the movies of the 70s managed to tap into it in a way that like our movies aren't doing. You know, like it's not quite the same. There's not like that potential for bleak endings for the characters.
It's interesting because I've been thinking a lot recently about, you know, what horror movie premises and ideas tend to be pretty successful in the modern day. And what I've noticed is that supernatural horror is maybe more popular than ever, but has never really gone away in popularity. So there are other, you know, slasher movies had their day. Like premises where the main villain or the main force of antagonism is just a person killing people. Those don't tend to be as popular as they used to be. What lingers are supernatural forces, you know, whether it's something as silly and dumb as Five Nights at Freddy's or any of these like Conjuring spin-off movies. Some sort of supernatural force of antagonism seems to be the key to at least popularity at the box office these days. People at least want to go see movies about ghosts and spirits and demons and things like that. And I know there's something there about, I don't know, there's something to that in terms of why that's so captivating to people. But a lot of these modern ones, I just feel like they have very explicit ideas about the world and politics and you know, what message they're supposed to send, the kind of keep them from doing things that might resonate more with people. I think if this movie, for example, was just, you know, without being more specific, if it was, let's say, people who, like we talked about this before, if there were people trying to bring about the resurrection of Jesus and creating like an antichrist figure instead, if this movie was more in keeping with the sort of attitude towards supernatural forces that the Omen had, I think it would be more popular. Hugh, I was just talking about how a lot of what becomes really popular in terms of horror movies these days tend to be supernatural, right? So clearly there's an appetite for this sort of thing.
Yeah.
I remember watching, I think it was the Red Letter Media guys talking about The Exorcist. I think the first one, where they were talking about Mike in particular, Mike Stoklasa was talking about how one of the things he really liked about The Exorcist was that, like, oh no, I remember they were talking about the Exorcist deceiver or believer or whatever it's called. This like N-th
Oh yeah,
Exorcist
the new
movie.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, that just came out, and I think Mike was talking about how in that movie, I didn't see it because it looks stupid, but in that movie they had to like assemble a team of like non-denominational religious people
Yeah, they
in
just
order
bring
to
them all.
Yeah. And it's just like, no, there's like a specificity to the original. Like, no, like for the sake of this story, it's Catholicism. You know what I mean? It's a priest and it's a demon. You know what I mean? It's a Catholic demon. Like, and that he really appreciated that, and it was really interesting to listen to because I know, at least from hearing him talk, that he's not a religious person. But there's like an appetite, at least in the realm of stories, to just treat this stuff seriously because people, I think, especially in a world that is less and less religious as time goes on, there's an appetite, at least in the realm of stories, to be like, but like let's see like what maybe we're missing, or let's see what it would look like to see those ideas played out or taken seriously. At least in the realm of stories, if nothing else, for just the purpose of entertainment. You know what I mean? But I feel like there's a lot of modern horror movies that, though they understand that the supernatural is like what people are into, they don't maybe understand why. I was thinking about this because I was thinking of all things Curb Your Enthusiasm, and I was thinking about like what attracts us to stories about like people who are like rude and mean or just unlikable people.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's like, well, we kind of have this idea that like, oh, what would it be like if I was just rude and said everything that came to mind? You know what I mean? And so you watch something like Curb Your Enthusiasm to like see what happens when you just say everything you wish you could say out loud to people. And generally in Curb Your Enthusiasm, like it goes wrong for him, right? And he usually ends up the butt of the joke, even if he got to give like a clever line to someone, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a similar principle when it comes to like the supernatural and horror movies. It's like there's an audience of people who are like, at least maybe explicitly, they don't consider themselves religious, but they're like, but like, you know, at least for the sake of the story, what would it be like if that was all true? You know what I mean? And I feel like there's an appetite for that is going unserved.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The idea of the paranormal is so fascinating to a lot of people who claim that they are not religious.
Yes, but they believe in ghosts.
They believe in ghosts, and they believe in demons, and like they believe that they're seeing otherworldly beings. Yeah, when they take too much Benadryl and they start they start hallucinating at night. They think that they're like, because certain people on the internet have seen similar things to them, they think they've tapped into some like beyond the veil of the spirit realm. Like I don't know exactly what it is that they think, but there is a unifying vision there behind the hallucinations that they think are real, or that they want to believe are real. Or the idea of like ghost stories. I think I told you about a friend of mine who said something about about how they were writing a piece about a hotel where there's an alligator ghost in the hotel. And I had said, I had asked, well, so, that's a good question. Why do we not see dinosaur ghosts around? And the person responded, well, because dinosaurs don't have any unfinished business. So there's something like...
I need to stop you right there, because I still think about that line and how funny it is. Like the implication that an alligator could have unfinished business on this plane and could be stuck in like an eternal limbo because they never got to like enact revenge for something that happened to them in their life.
Their alligator family, was taken from them by a hippopotamus, and they're
meanwhile dinosaurs see the asteroid coming and they're like, you know what? I lived a pretty full life. No regrets. It's been making me laugh for like a couple days ever since you told me about that. Like, no, of course dinosaurs, they don't have any unfinished business.
That's why we never see dinosaur ghosts roaming around, like that's it's either that or animals don't have souls. So like, you've got to pick one or the other. basically, and it's not going to
Yeah.
be that second one. So, no, but like, it's interesting.
No one who likes dogs more than they like other people is going to believe that animals don't have souls.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, the
Fortunately,
dinosaur ghost thing. So obviously, all dinosaurs were just very well-rounded characters. You know,
Yeah.
who never had conflict and you know all that kind of thing. But I think it speaks to some level, right? Of people want a story that you know means something to them. They want a story about you know a life beyond this one that means something to them, and they're willing to go to certain places to get it, but not to the traditional outlets. What is what I would say there. And it's interesting that like we haven't quite like maybe it's something that like they don't know exactly what it is what they want, you know, but like horror movies haven't quite managed to tap into that yet. You know, they haven't managed to tap into in some way they've done it. You know, with like Get Out has a particular kind of cultural influence.
As unpalatable as I find the sort of message of that movie, it does tap into genuine fears that people have.
Yes.
Founded or not founded, there's something that it taps into there. And there are other movies that have done that in recent years, but it just doesn't feel like a lot of them do. I think this movie will be forgotten. If it hasn't already been forgotten, it will be soon. It doesn't really offer anything in that respect.
Yeah,
you know,
it made, I think it said it made 8 million so far on
you know, this came up when on the last EFAP I was on, we were watching a video about themes from a guy called Closer Look, who among many other things was talking about you know why people love The Dark Knight and don't like The Dark Knight Rises. And one of the things he said was that like, you know, there are plot holes in both movies, but people don't really mind the plot holes in The Dark Knight because the themes are better. And now it's a little more complicated than that, because I think the plot holes in The Dark Knight Rises are worse. Though I do think there are some plot issues in The Dark Knight. But the reasons I bring it up is because though that video that we watched was rather bad on the whole, there is something to the idea that people really like the sort of themes and the core of the story of a story like The Dark Knight, because it's a real sort of good versus evil type story, and the perspectives feel fleshed out, even if there are plot chisms all over the place. You know, the core of what the Joker represents versus the core of what Batman represents is something that people find really compelling, and it taps into something, right? It's a sort of the whole movie is concerned with the question of whether like
it's a hero standing against chaos, and when push comes to shove, will people choose the evil option?
Yeah. Will they turn on each other, or is there an innate goodness to human beings? Like that's the sort of core to the story that people.
You know, this is reminding me so much too. Just bringing up that movie is reminding me of that scene that I like. The more I think about it, because I think about this movie a lot. It's one of my favorite movies. The more I think about it, the more that scene where the guy on the convict on the boat throws the bomb detonator out of the window is so fucking good. Yeah. What an incredible scene.
I agree. The Dark Knight is one of those movies that like I've heard all the criticisms of the plot and like how little some of it makes sense, and I go, no, yeah, you're right. I think there's a lot of problems with the movie, but what does work about it is just so goddamn good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That on the whole, it's like I'm willing to ignore parts of it. Not ignore, but just like look at them and acknowledge.
Yeah, I'm willing to just like to say like, yeah, but I like it anyway. It doesn't break it for me.
Yeah. No, and because it taps into something. And you know it's interesting, someone said earlier that AI is a big one to tap into right now, because there's a lot of fears surrounding the future of AI and everything. It's interesting that like so many of the better like AI based horror movies, like let's say Terminator and others, like happened already, and that we're not getting a lot of them anymore. It's interesting. Speaking of tapping into something, I feel like this was something I haven't seen a lot of people talk about with Oppenheimer. This is something I've told you about, Hugh, but
Yeah.
I've even looked to see if anyone's done a video essay about this, but just like looking at Oppenheimer through the lens of like what we can learn as we're going through an AI arms race, and like how the history of the nuclear arms race can compare to it. Because essentially you have a guy creating a technology that like has the potential to change everything and then having regrets about it. And it's like, well, what do we do? There's all these pressures in the world pushing towards a certain thing, like you can't stop the nuclear arms race once it's started. You know what I mean? And I don't think you can really meaningfully stop the AI arms race that's happening right now either. But like, it's interesting to look at that movie and why there's something about it that resonates with people right now as we find ourselves in the midst of a different arms race. And I think it's really interesting. It really taps into something, like that final, as much as I think the movie is flawed in terms of how it executes these things, I understand that there's something being tapped into there about like, we might be on a path now towards the undoing of society, and there's those fears about AI, though they might not be like
Not
result in anything as extreme as what people are worried about. Like, there's definitely the potential, it could be disastrous, and something, someone was talking about this. I can't remember who at the moment, but they were talking about symbolically what, like spirits and demons like can represent and how they can show up symbolically in real life. And like the idea that like we're all pushing towards like the proliferation and development of AI, even though many people involved and watching from the sidelines are like, this is scary. Why are we doing this? You know what I mean? Like, this could go disastrously wrong. Why are we all hurtling toward it? But there's enough incentives pushing people towards the development of AI that it almost feels like we're all wrapped up in and like possessed by something. You know what I mean? Like, he was talking about like that sort of like possession imagery in regards to this sort of like arms race technological development thing. It's like some sort of ideas possessing people on the whole, symbolically, not literally. But I just find that really interesting, like as a vein to be tapped by horror stories. A lot of horror stories these days seem to be like, aren't nuns in the church scary? I'm like, I don't know. Are they anymore? Like, they don't really have
how
much
many
control.
are there left?
Like how much control do they really have over the world? I just don't know if I find that scary. I don't know if you're really tapping into what people are actually concerned about. With like demons and ghosts and stuff, there's something there because there's, something of an emergence or rekindling of a belief in certain like supernatural forces, even if they're like people who don't think they're religious, but they do believe in ghosts. And it's like, well, there's something there. It's like there's a belief in spirits that animate the world, but they seem to be mostly negative at this point. There's something interesting in that. They haven't like come to any sort of belief in like good natured supernatural forces yet. But there's something rekindling there that I feel like a lot of horror movies just aren't tapping into.
You want to hear something crazy? In 2022, there were reportedly fewer than 42,000 nuns in America, a 76% decline over the last 50 years. At the rate that sisters are disappearing, one estimate said there will be fewer than 1,000 left in the United States by 2042.
Wow. That's dramatic.
That's a huge drop off. There is no way that you're capitalizing on some overall fear of like religion anymore. Sure. Yeah. Like you're really just kind of beating a dead horse, Like if this was still a time when the church had some mode of political power, but endangered species, the nun. Yes, that's a good that's a good one. But like, if the church still had some level of political power, maybe. But I don't think anybody really even gives a fuck what the Pope says anymore, let alone the nuns in America. So like, I don't know. Yeah. It's a weird one to go back to.
It feels almost like a safe target. If
yeah,
it's like it feels safe in a way. what was I going to say? That what I have seen that I think definitely struck a nerve for a brief time at least was like the reemergence of what you might call folk horror, with stuff like The Witch, and even to a lesser extent like Midsummer and stuff like that. Or even Hereditary to a degree. It's kind of like the reemergence of, like, I don't know, the occult and paganism and things like that. That seems to be resonating with people to a degree. It's not like people on the whole are turning back to paganism. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But
there are some, but yeah, no, it's not.
Well, yeah, they're few and far between. But there seems to be something in that that appeals to people, or at least it's like the old, you know, primordial or primeval sort of views of the world are kind of like reemerging in ugly ways. Like there's something interesting in that. I know we're months away from it because I know we plan to talk about The Witch, The Lighthouse, and The Northman leading up to Nosferatu, but I can't wait to talk about The Witch again.
Yeah,
I really
man.
like The Witch, and that feels like one of the best examples of that. You know, like witchcraft and the occult seems to still have a sway over people. You know what I mean? And like that one's interesting to me.
Yeah.
As a vein to mine later, because it's almost like using, it's like it's supernatural forces and spirits and things being used corruptly for the sake of like power and stuff like that. That seems to be like more resonant with people than like, the church is evil and they just want to control women. Am I right? It's like, I don't know if that's hitting the same way anymore, guys. I don't know. I'm sort of thinking around a complex sort of topic here, but I don't think.
But yeah, the Omen, not great. The first Omen, sorry, the first Omen, not great. The original Omen, pretty great. Check it out.
I like it. Great is a strong word, but it's a good movie.
Yeah, I mean, it hits in a different kind of way. You know, like it's still hitting strong. It's not as good as The Exorcist. It's not as good as some other 70s horror movies. Like, I mean, I don't know if I would put it as like up there with Invasion of the Body Snatchers either, but it's pretty good.
Sorry, that's a movie that really tapped into something. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, you know. Obviously, the original did as well, but Invasion of the Body Snatchers. One of the things I find most interesting about the 70s Invasion of the Body Snatchers is that it takes place in a city, while most horror movies tend to take place in isolated locations, rural places, secluded environments. It takes place in a city, and it's kind of like being surrounded by strangers you can't trust. Like, as this, you know, especially taking place in the 70s when cities were not a fun place to be. In terms of crime and all that sort of stuff, and like not knowing the people
How has
around
it changed?
Well, it's definitely not. It's getting more like that. I'll say that. That really tapped into something, and I understand why a lot of, especially low budget horror movies, they don't take place in cities for budget reasons. But like that movie really tapped into a sort of fear and paranoia and distrust of like the people around you that I wouldn't wish it because I wouldn't trust a lot of modern writers to do it well, but now would be a good time for another Invasion of the Body Snatchers type movie.
Yeah.
I think there's something there, you know, especially as people feel more like atomized and stuff like that, where they don't necessarily know the people that they're living right next to and all that sort of stuff. There's something there. There's something there that could be explored. We should look back to the 70s horror movies, because I think there's a sort of
there's parallels to be drawn for sure.
Yes. Jay said being alone is a death sentence for most people. While there's a very good reason to fear it. Oh, absolutely. You know, isolation, especially social isolation. I mean, that's a big part of The Witch, right? The Witch is like they get banished from their small little
New England village. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then they're sentenced to die basically as a result. You know, I'm not discounting that type of horror at all. One of the things I like about Invasion of the Body Snatchers is that it's different in that regard, and that's sort of the fear of being surrounded by people you can't trust. It's still isolation, but it's not the same kind of isolation. There's something interesting about it. and unique and refreshing, especially as anyone who's like lived in a major city has ever like had that sort of fear before, something to it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Any other closing thoughts you have?
Yeah, we're just talking randomly about horror movies now, but yeah, I like The Omen. It's a fun movie to revisit every once in a while. I'd like to revisit now some of the movies I like even slightly more from the 70s and late 60s, I should say.
Yeah, man, I would. Oh man, I gotta say,
I love Rosemary's Baby. I'd love to rewatch that.
Oh, what a good fucking movie! Yeah, like this movie really, the first Omen really made me just kind of be like, I really, and funnily enough, the theater right by my house, guess what they're playing in? I think today, actually, they're screening Rosemary's Baby.
Oh.
Yeah, no, there's.
You asked me to guess, and I was going to guess Death to Smoochie, starring Danny DeVito and Edward Norton.
No, not that one, but that would be fun too. They're screening both The Godfather and Rosemary's Baby, I think, today. And I'm a little annoyed that I won't be able to make it to either of those because I would love to watch those in a theater. I saw Jaws in a theater last 4th of July, and holy shit, that was fantastic.
You know what? I was watching a video recently where someone was talking about the symbolism of dragons in sort of ancient stories and sea serpents and all that sort of stuff. And they were basically like the last good movie about a dragon we had was Jaws. And I was like, you know what? Like, you're right. Jaws is just like a sea serpent monster that they need to go out and destroy. It's kind of funny because it doesn't really behave like a shark.
Exactly.
It's just a monster. And, it's kind of interesting, the last great movie about that sort of thing. Jaws is great.
You could argue Dune also.
Dune's, yeah, a little bit, yeah.
It has sea serpents in it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good stuff in terms of like subtle symbolic aspects, especially in Dune Part 2. Where they have to like extract the poison from the sandworm and like ride it, and all like the way that all that stuff plays out is really good. Dune Part 2 really scratched that itch for me in terms of like seeing sort of archaic imagery and worldviews and stuff like that represented authentically. I mean, obviously it's not real, it's fictionalized, but there's something very authentic about it that I really liked.
Yeah, I've been rereading the first Dune, and I really like it. I really like it. It's hot take. Pretty good, huh? The first Dune book is pretty fucking good. Also, it has been officially confirmed that Denis Villeneuve is doing Dune 3. So we are going to get a finished story eventually.
I'm looking forward to it. I remember when we talked about it on stream the other week, some people in our panel were like, if this is all they ever did, I'd be fine with it. And
no, I would not.
I couldn't. No, I'm like, no, this is not the end of the story. I need to know what happens to Paul. I need to see his fall, so to speak. We've seen the rise. We need to see the fall. So I'm looking forward to Dune Messiah, if indeed it's called that. It might just be called Dune Part 3. I'm not sure. Looking forward to it.
It'll be interesting. I'm excited to see. I'm excited to reread Messiah and give it a second chance because I mentioned on the panel that I did not care for Messiah, but I'm going to give it another chance. I'm gonna reread it especially before the new one comes out because I am really curious to see how the changes from what they did in this version of the movie are going to affect the story of Messiah.
Yes, that's what I've heard as well. Yeah. It should be really interesting because he changed quite a bit. We'll see like how that affects the third movie.
Yeah, so I'm excited for that. And I guess speaking of 70s movies too, I've been reading Quentin Tarantino's new book. Well, I guess it's not that new, but it's new in paperback, which is called Cinema Speculation, and it is really interesting. There's a lot of like late 60s, 70s movies that I have not seen that Tarantino talks about being like huge influences on him, and basically like how he went to see them in like very pulpy theaters in Hollywood when he was young, which like it's kind of giving me a new watch list idea, stuff that I'd like to take a look at and see the things that influenced one of my favorite directors. But I
hope the movie critic is good.
Yeah,
it would be a shame if his last movie was kind of a
dud.
mean, he hasn't. I mean, okay, so other than Death Proof, which I haven't seen, he hasn't made a bad movie that I have seen, and I've seen all the others. So I'd be surprised if the movie Critic was bad, but I hope it's one of his better movies because he seems pretty committed to the idea of actually retiring and not making any more movies because he's just that.
Well,
he's that.
His novel career is taking off. People really liked the novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that he did. So,
Oh, I didn't even know he did that. Interesting.
yeah, people. I grabbed a copy of that as well. So we'll see. I'm gonna give that a try after I finish with Dune and Dune Messiah. But people apparently really liked it. It introduced a interesting style. People are kind of hype on him right now, so he might just switch over to doing books for a little while, and I'd be okay with that.
I know he's planning to write some plays as well. That would be kind of fun.
That'd be interesting to see too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think The Hateful Eight probably would work better as a stage play, if anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that seems like a good place to end it. Thanks for hanging out and listening to us talk about some spooky Catholic horror movies.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
If you're still listening and you haven't seen either movie, which perhaps is unlikely, but it might be the case, go watch The Omen. It's good. I don't think we've spoiled the experience of watching it for you. And when it comes to the first Omen, if you've got nothing else to watch, go check it out. I mean, I know there's movies like Monkey Man out that are getting good reviews, so it's not even necessarily the best thing in theaters right now. Can't exactly recommend it, but you wouldn't hate watching it probably. I'd be shocked if anyone actually hated this movie, but it's not good. Not great.
Yeah, I would have been a lot more angry if I had to drive an hour to, get to the theater.
Yeah.
I managed to have a good enough time with it, but I will not be watching it again. And next week,
I can't imagine we'd ever watch it again.
Next week we will be back with Civil War, I believe. Comes out this Friday, right?
You're right. It sure does. So I guess we're talking about that next week, baby. Al Scarlett Civil War, which I'm sure will be the greatest movie.
Interesting. It's less than 2 hours long.
Oh wow.
An hour and 49 minutes. That's a big step forward for little Alex.
Alex Garland's Civil War, also known as Tim Pool's Wet Dream. We'll be talking about that next Sunday. So come hang out.
Texas
for hanging out.
Texas and California on the same team. Now it's sci-fi.
Can't wait to see how that works out. Thanks to everyone in the chat for hanging out, especially Jay Jameson, who has comprised most of today's chat. Thanks for hanging out with us.
And who shares my take on Dune Messiah. So, good for you. Good for you. Don't get pressured by the Dune family into, liking the second book.
I don't know if that's controversial.
Stay strong. I don't know if it is either. I know there's a lot of people. You don't have to apologize, Jay. Please. It's very. It's nice to know that somebody cares.
Anyway, it's been fun. Short stream today, in and out. Maybe we'll convince some of the people in this sphere to suffer through Civil War with us and talk about it on Sunday. Until then, enjoy the rest of what is left of your weekend, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, friends.